So Jinhan opened his eyes and didn't recognize the ceiling. The stone arches of the basement loomed above him. It smelled of dust and old paper. He was lying on the floor amid scrolls and couldn't remember how he'd ended up there. Then he remembered. He remembered everything. The rumbling upstairs, the screams, the crackling of wood, and the smell of smoke seeping through the cracks in the door. He had been sorting through the discarded scrolls when the world upstairs ceased to exist. Now it was quiet. Too quiet for a place where, just yesterday, 3,000 people had lived. Jinhan got to his feet. His knees were shaking, not from fear, from the cold. He'd spent the night on the stone floor without a blanket. The oil lamp had burned out, leaving only black soot on the wall. He walked over to the door and pushed. It wouldn't budge. He pushed harder. Nothing. Something had blocked the doorway from the outside. He rammed it with his shoulder. Pain shot from his collarbone to his elbow. He rammed it again, and again. On the fourth try, the door shifted a hand's breadth and light poured through the crack. Gray, ashen. He squeezed through the gap and stepped outside. The main hall of the White Crane sect stood before him, or rather, what was left of it. Black column skeletons jutted out of the piles of charred roof tiles like broken ribs. The roof had collapsed inward. The walls were cracked and leaning. Jinhan took a step forward and his sandal crunched on the broken tiles. The sound echoed through the deathly silence like the toll of a bell. The training area was on the right. Craters in the ground. Traces of combat techniques had left scorched furrows in the stone. Blood. A lot of blood. Brown stains on the white sand of the training ground. The living quarters further up the slope. Ash. Nothing but ash. 300 years of the White Crane sect's history, 17 generations of masters, a library of 3,000 techniques. It all burned down in a single night. Jinhan walked through the sect's grounds, counting the bodies. 1 by the eastern gate, 3 on the plaza, 2 in the passageway between the pavilions. He recognized them by their clothes because their faces were already unrecognizable. Wen's disciple, Mentor Li, elder brother Gohan, with whom he shared rice at dinner every evening. He found Elder Louis's body by the northern wall. The elder lay face up. His eyes were open. A sword was clenched in his right hand. A training sword, a wooden hilt, a blunt blade for training. Jinhan stopped and stared at that sword for a long time. Elder Louis possessed a 5th-rank heavenly-level technique. He could split a rock with the flick of a finger, but he died with a training sword in his hand. Because he had passed on his true techniques to his inner disciples. Because he was covering the departure of those he considered the sect's future, and he died with a wooden sword in his hands. It was this very man who 10 years ago had taken in a hungry boy on the streets of Liuhe. He gave him a bowl of rice porridge. He said the sect needed a scribe and that any work is a path. Jinhan knelt down beside the body. He didn't cry. His tears had run dry long ago, back in those years when he slept under bridges and ate whatever he found in the gutters. Something else had taken the place of tears. Cold, clear, like a winter morning after a snowfall, when you can see all the way to the horizon. He looked at his hands, the hands of a scribe, slender fingers calloused from the brush. For 8 years he had copied scrolls, 600 techniques transcribed by hand, every character, every diagram of chi flows, every note the master had jotted in the margins. He knew these techniques by heart, knew their structure, knew how they were built from the inside out. But he had no right to practice a single one. An outer disciple of the lowest rank, a water carrier, a janitor, a copyist, the 3rd stage of body tempering, the weakest level of cultivation. 10-year-old children were stronger than him. He stood up. He glanced back at the entrance to the basement. Down there lay hundreds of scrolls, trash, drafts, incomplete copies, student exercises, rejected works that even the looters who had ransacked the library had discarded. Any cultivator who saw this storeroom would have thrown it all away without a second thought. Fragments of techniques, a third of a breathing method, 2 movements out of 12 in a sword technique, principles without application. Taken separately, they were useless, absolutely useless. Jinhan stood between the elder's body and the entrance to the basement, between a past that had been destroyed and a future that didn't exist. He was all that remained of the White Crane, a single scribe without a single technique, with cultivation at a child's level, with a basement full of junk. But that junk was all he had, so he would learn to turn that junk into weapons. Jinhan buried Elder Louis first. He dug the grave with his bare hands because the shovel had burned along with the utility pavilion. The soil on Mount Lingyun was hard and rocky. His fingers bled. His fingernails broke. He didn't stop. Then he buried the rest, one by one, all day long. The sun rose, passed overhead, and began to set in the west. He found 11 bodies. The rest had either burned completely or been carried away by the attackers. 11 graves in a row on the eastern slope. No headstones, no markers, just mounds of earth. He memorized each spot. Someday he would set up stones. Someday. Right now, he had neither the strength nor the time for that. By evening, he went back down to the basement. He sat on the floor among the scrolls. He lit a new oil lamp from his supplies. His hands trembled with exhaustion. The blood under his fingernails had dried into a brown crust. He picked up the first scroll, unrolled it. The breath of the morning mist, a basic breathing practice. He had copied this scroll 3 years ago and remembered every line, 40% of the complete version. Without the final cycle, the technique didn't work. Useless. He set it aside. He picked up the second one. Purification of the channels with dew, a medical method for the lower meridians. Only the lower ones. Without the upper part, it was useless. He set it aside. The third, the white crane step in the student version, simplified to the point of losing all meaning. The fourth, basic chi circulation chi, Elder Chen's draft, with an error in the third cycle that the author crossed out but didn't correct. Fifth, observing the morning star, a meditative practice with no practical application. 5 worthless scrolls, 5 scraps not even worth the paper they were written on. Jinhan spread them out before him on the stone floor. The lamp flickered. Shadows danced across the walls. He looked at the 5 scrolls and saw what he always saw. Rubbish. He closed his eyes, opened them again, and the world had changed. He couldn't explain what had happened. It was as if someone had removed a veil from his eyes. As if all those 8 years of copying, all 600 techniques transcribed by hand, all those thousands of hours spent alone with the structures of foreign arts, all of it had condensed into a single point and exploded. He looked at the 5 scrolls and, for the first time in his life, saw not 5 separate texts. He saw a map. The breath from the first scroll set the rhythm. This rhythm aligned perfectly with the circulation described in the 4th scroll if the 3rd cycle were corrected. And it could be corrected using the principle from the 2nd scroll, the principle of purifying the channels with dew. It worked only on the lower meridians, but the error in Elder Chen's draft lay precisely in the lower circuit. The 2 fragments compensated for each other's weaknesses. The crane's step, the student version, simplified to the point of uselessness. But it hadn't been simplified by accident. Someone had stripped away everything from it except the rhythm. And this rhythm synchronized the breath and the movement of qi. It wasn't a movement technique, it was a metronome. And observing the morning star, a meditation with no practical application. Only now did Jinhan see why it was necessary. A method for focusing the mind. It held all the flows together in unity, the connecting link, the keystone of the arch. 5 worthless scrolls, 1 mechanism. Jinhan set to work. He laid out the scrolls in a specific order. He took a brush and a blank sheet of paper. His hands were still trembling, but no longer from fatigue, from something else. He was drawing a diagram of the chi flows, connecting the fragments, checking the compatibility of the nodes. First attempt. The structure fell apart at the 3rd connection. The chi was flowing in the wrong direction. He erased it and started over. Second attempt. Better. 4 fragments fit together. The 5th wouldn't fit. Third attempt. It fell apart again. Sweat ran down his temples and dripped onto the paper. The oil lamp was smoking. The air in the basement grew thick and hot. 4th attempt. He changed the order. He placed meditation at the beginning rather than the end, observing the star as the foundation, the breath of the mist as the first layer, Chen's circulation with the corrected 3rd cycle as the 2nd, purification by the dew as the bridge between the lower and upper circuits. The crane's step as the rhythm holding everything together. A click. He felt it physically, as if something had fallen into place inside his skull. The streams aligned. The 5 trash scrolls had merged into a single technique, the Dawn Crane method, a full-fledged earth-rank cultivation technique. It simultaneously develops the core, it cleanses the meridians, it accelerates the absorption of spiritual energy, a technique that an average sect would treasure, assembled from trash, in the basement, on the cold floor. By a boy with the 3rd level of body tempering. Jinhan held the newly created scroll in his hands and looked at it by the light of a dying lamp. Dawn was seeping through a crack in the door, the second dawn since the sect's demise. He smiled, not out of joy, out of understanding. The junk room wasn't a curse. It was a library that no one but him knew how to read. He laid the scroll on the floor, sat down in a meditation posture, and for the first time in his life, he began to cultivate. 7 days had passed since the night of the ash moon. Jinhong had barely left the basement. The Dawn Crane method was working. Every morning, he assumed the cultivation posture and guided his chi along the circuit he himself had pieced together from 5 fragments. The spiritual energy of Mount Lingyan flowed through him slowly and reluctantly. The third stage of body tempering. His meridians were narrow and clogged like overgrown ditches. But the technique was working. In the first 3 days, he had covered half the distance to the 4th stage. For any normal cultivator, this would have been a laughable result. For him, it was a miracle. But cultivation took up only the morning hours. The rest of the time belonged to work. Jinhan began sorting through the warehouse, systematically, methodically, just as he had done for 8 years in the library. Only now, he saw the scrolls differently. Every fragment of technology was now not just text, but a 3-dimensional structure with flows, nodes, and voids. He would take out a scroll, unroll it. He looked at it with fresh eyes. He identified its type. He found its strengths. He found its weaknesses. He determined what this fragment could be combined with. He made a mark with his brush in the corner. A blue dot meant breathing techniques. Red meant combat techniques. Green meant medical techniques. Yellow meant formation techniques. Black meant those that were incomprehensible or too damaged to analyze. In a week, he went through 214 scrolls. There were 31 blue ones, 47 red ones, 22 green ones, 19 yellow ones, 95 black ones, almost half. Jinhan drew a map on the basement floor. He arranged the scrolls into groups. He began looking for matches. It was like working with a mosaic from which 80% of the pieces were missing. But even from the remaining 20, it was possible to piece something together if you knew the pattern. And Jinhan knew it. 8 years of transcribing had given him what no teacher could. He knew how the techniques worked, not from the outside, but from the inside. Just as a chef knows a recipe not by taste, but by the chemistry of the ingredients. On the 8th day, he assembled the second technique, the stone crane armor, a defensive technique for the body. 3 fragments. A fragment of a skin hardening method from the combat section, a piece of a breathing exercise that strengthened the bones, and a strange meditative practice that, at first glance, seemed to involve contemplating a waterfall, but actually contained the principle of distributing chi across the body's surface. Earth rank. Not high, but enough to withstand a blow from an ordinary thug and not die. On the 9th day, he tried to piece together a combat technique, for the first time. He took 4 red scrolls that seemed compatible, 2 variations of a fire palm strike, a fragment of a technique for concentrating chi in the fist, and a snippet of something related to directing energy in a straight line. He began to combine them. The first and second scrolls fit together easily. The third fit with some difficulty. The fourth? Jinhong pulled the 4th fragment into the structure and felt resistance. Something wasn't fitting right. He pressed harder. The mental structure trembled. He pressed even harder. A click, but not the right one. Not the sound of pieces falling into place. The sound of something breaking. The structure crumbled. All 4 scrolls flared up at once. Not with fire. A dim, deathly light. The ink on the paper blurred. The diagrams turned into meaningless smudges. The 4 scrolls became blank sheets. Useless. Forever. Jinhong sat on the floor and stared at the blank sheets. His hands were shaking. His head was splitting, as if someone had driven a nail between his eyes. He had lost 4 fragments. 4 out of 47 combat fragments, almost a 10th. And he understood the limits of his ability as clearly as if someone had burned that knowledge onto the inside of his eyelids. A mistake during stitching destroys the components. Every attempt is a risk. You can't try at random. You can't rush. You can't force it when you feel resistance. He put this rule first on the list he'd begun to write on the basement wall with charcoal. Don't rush, don't guess, don't force it. The migraine didn't go away for 2 days. For 2 days, he couldn't work with the scrolls. He couldn't even look at them. His head felt like it was exploding whenever he tried to activate the transcriber's eye. He spent those 2 days on something else. He went outside. He surveyed the ruins anew. This time, not as a grieving student, but as a person who would live here. The basement ceiling was intact. The walls were sturdy. The door could be repaired. Water. A stream on the western slope, 200 paces from the entrance. He checked it. Clean. Drinking water. Food. Mountain herbs. Berries on the southern slope. Hunting. He didn't know how to hunt, but he had no choice. He fashioned a snare from a scrap of rope he found in the ruins of the utility shed. He set it along an animal trail further down the slope. The next morning, a mountain hare was struggling in the snare. Jinhong built a fire from the debris of wooden beams. He roasted the hare. It was his first hot meal in 10 days. He ate slowly, every bite, and he thought. He couldn't stay here forever, all alone. Sooner or later, someone would come. Bandits, Ma raiders, or worse. Those who had destroyed the sect might return to make sure there were no witnesses left. He needed protection. Not walls, not formations. People. But who would go to a boy in the ruins of a dead sect? No one. So he needed something that would attract people more than fear would scare them away. He needs techniques. Good techniques. The kind that cultivators are willing to risk everything for. He returned to the scrolls on the 3rd day when his migraine had subsided. He worked more carefully, more slowly. He checked every connection 3 times before securing it. On the 15th day after the massacre, he assembled his 3rd technique, the flow of living water, a method for rapidly restore ki after battle or injury. 4 fragments, 2 medical, 1 respiratory, and a piece of strange technique marked as unclear, a black dot. He almost overlooked that scroll. It contained only 3 lines, a description of the principle of reverse circulation. Without context, it was a meaningless jumble of words. But when combined with the medical fragments, this principle transformed ordinary treatment into a cycle of self-healing. Qi didn't just heal the wound. It memorized the healthy state of the meridian and restored it to that point, again and again, until the damage disappeared. Earth rank, high earth rank, close to heaven rank. 3 techniques in 15 days. The Dawn Crane method for cultivation. The Stone Crane armor for defense. The flow of living water for restoration. The bare minimum for survival. Not for combat, for survival. Jinhan wrote down all 3 techniques on blank sheets of paper in the neat handwriting of a scribe. He rolled them up, tied them, placed them in a separate niche in the basement wall. The first scrolls of the White Crane sect's new library. 3 scrolls in a niche that once held 3,000. He stood before this niche and looked at the 3 lonely scrolls. Then he turned to the rest, to the hundreds of fragments scattered across the floor. Blue, red, green, yellow, black, rubbish, from which he intended to build the future. On the 21st day, he heard a sound he hadn't heard in 3 weeks, a human voice. He climbed out of the basement and stepped into the light. On the mountain trail leading to the ruins of the cult lay a person, a woman, young. Her clothes were torn in several places. Her hair was disheveled and matted with blood. Her right hand was pressed against her side, where a dark stain was spreading. She was unconscious. A sword lay nearby, long, straight, with an unusual hilt designed for a reverse grip. Jinhong approached. He checked her breathing, weak but steady. A wound on her side, deep. Blood was still flowing. He wasn't a healer, but the stream of living water was a healing technique, and he had just mastered it. He carried the woman down to the basement. He laid her down on a cleared spot. He tore a strip of fabric from his own shirt and bandaged the wound. Then he sat down beside her and directed his qi along the path of the flow of living water. Energy flowed from his palms into her body, slowly. His qi reserve was minuscule, 4th level of body tempering. It was like trying to put out a fire with a cup of water. But the technique worked. He could feel the qi finding the damaged areas and beginning its work. He sat beside her for 6 hours. He changed the bandages. He channeled the qi. His own meridians burned from the strain. Twice he lost consciousness for a few seconds and woke up to the sensation of his forehead hitting the stone floor. By morning, the bleeding had stopped. The wound began to heal. The woman's breathing had evened out. Jinhong sat nearby, leaning against the wall, completely drained. Not a drop of qi, not a shred of strength. He looked at her sword leaning against the wall. Reverse grip, an unconventional hilt. Interesting. He closed his eyes and fell asleep. She woke up the next day. Jinhan was sitting by the far wall studying a scroll when he heard a rustle. The woman opened her eyes. She sat up abruptly. She clutched her side and doubled over in pain. Her hand darted toward her belt, where her sword usually hung. Her fingers clenched the empty air. She turned her head and saw the sword against the wall 3 steps away. Then she saw Jinhan. Her body tensed. Her gaze was appraising. Quick. She looked at him like someone accustomed to assessing a threat in a split second. Jinhan didn't move. He raised his open palms to show they were empty. She asked where she was. He replied that she was on Mount Lingyun, on the territory of the former White Crane sect. She looked around. She saw the walls of the cellar. Scrolls, a oil lamp, a bandage on her side. She asked who had bandaged her. He replied that he had done it. She fell silent for a moment. Then she gave her name, Yun Sora, a wandering swordswoman. She had been attacked by 3 bandits on a mountain trail 2 days ago. She had killed 2 of them. The third one stabbed her in the side with a blade and fled. She had been walking up the slope because she knew there were buildings at the top.
She didn't know they had been destroyed.
Jinhan nodded and handed her a cup of water. She took it. She drank it in one gulp. She looked at him again, appraisingly. He could tell she had assessed his cultivation level, the 4th stage of body tempering. For a swordswoman who had killed 2 bandits single-handedly, this was a child's level. She asked how he had healed the wound with such a technique while having such a weak chi reserve. He replied that the technique was good. The reserve didn't matter if the circuit was built correctly. She raised an eyebrow. For the next 3 days, Sora lay down and recovered. Jinhan continued the treatment for an hour in the morning and an hour in the evening. His own chi reserve was growing slowly but surely. The flow of living water was working on him as well. Between treatment sessions, he studied the scrolls. Sora watched, at first in silence. Then she began to ask questions. She asked what he was doing. He explained, simply, without unnecessary words. Here's a scroll with a fragment of a technique. Here's another. They don't work on their own, but if you combine them correctly, something new will emerge. She didn't believe him. She said it was impossible, that techniques couldn't simply be pieced together like a broken plate, that each technique was a complete path, and mixing them was a path to chi regression and the destruction of meridians. Any cultivator on the continent would have said the same thing. It was common knowledge. It was a rule that no one questioned. Jinhan silently handed her the scroll containing the Dawn Crane method. She unrolled it. She read it. Her expression changed. She read slowly, tracing the lines with her finger. Then she went back to the beginning and read it again. She looked up. There was something in her eyes that Jinhan had never seen before. Not distrust, not surprise, shock. She said this technique was Earth rank, high Earth rank, that she'd seen similar methods in the catalogs of major sects and they cost hundreds of gold. She asked where he'd gotten it. He nodded toward the 5 empty scrolls lying separately. He said he'd pieced it together from those 5. She looked at the scrolls, then at him, then back at the scrolls. She said nothing. On the 4th day, she got up. The wound had healed. Not completely, but enough for her to move. She took her sword. She went out onto the plaza in front of the basement. Jinhan followed her out. She stood on the ruined training ground of the White Crane sect, holding her sword in a reverse grip. Her left foot was forward. Her right hand, holding the sword, was drawn back, a stance that no fencing school on the continent would recognize as correct. She moved, slowly. She was protecting her injured side. But even at half strength, Jinhan saw what a scribe, not a warrior, would see. He saw the trajectory. The reverse grip created an arc of movement that defied all standard sword patterns. Defenses from bottom to top instead of top to bottom. Thrusts with a twist of the wrist. Counterattacks from a retreat. Every movement was a mirror image of the classical school. Incorrect. Absolutely incorrect from any master's perspective. 3 masters refused to teach her. She told him this that evening as they sat by the fire in front of the cellar entrance. The first said she held the sword like a butcher. The second said her style was corrupted and it was too late to retrain. The third simply turned away and left. She traveled for 3 years, searching for a teacher who would accept her technique. She didn't find one. Jinhan listened and stared into the fire. Then he said one thing. He said her style wasn't a mistake. It was incomplete. Like a scroll on which only half the technique had been written. Not broken, not flawed, just incomplete. She fell silent. He saw her fingers clench the hilt of the sword lying on her lap. He returned to the basement and began to work. Among the red scrolls were fragments of sword techniques, 7 of them. 2 scraps of the classical straight blade style. 3 fragments of an unknown technique with unusual trajectories. 1 piece on breathing rhythm linked to weapon movement. And 1 unmarked scroll. A black dot. Indecipherable. Jinhong laid out all 7. He activated the scribe's eye. His head immediately began to throb. He ignored the pain. He studied them. The 2 classical fragments were useless to Sora. Straight grip, standard trajectories, not with her style. But the 3 unknown fragments, he looked closer. Trajectories, arcs, angles. They followed the same direction as Sora's movements, not identical, but based on the same principle. As if someone hundreds of years ago had begun developing a reverse grip style and abandoned it halfway through. Or as if someone had recorded half of it and the other half had been lost. Jinhan felt a familiar thrill, the same click he'd felt when he saw the Dawn Crane method. The pieces of the mosaic began to fall into place. But 7 fragments weren't enough. For the celestial rank, you need 7 to 10 perfectly matched elements. He had 3 that fit, plus the breathing rhythm for the weapon. 4. He needed more. He returned to the general catalog. He went through scroll after scroll, searching for compatible elements. It took him 5 days. During those days, Sora had fully recovered. She went hunting. She hauled water. She repaired the cellar door. She didn't leave and didn't say why. Jinhong found the missing fragments in the most unexpected places. A piece on evasion techniques from the yellow scrolls. The principle of redirecting an opponent's force from a medical scroll on working with another's chi. And 2 fragments from the black scrolls that he had previously set aside as incomprehensible. One turned out to be a description of the principle of rotation. Not of a sword, of the body. A rotation of the torso that generated additional force for a reverse grip strike. The second was a fragment of something he couldn't identify. 3 lines, a marginal note in handwriting he recognized. Elder Liu, his handwriting, his note. 3 lines on how to synchronize one's internal chi with the blade's movement through the feedback loop between the palm and the hilt. Jinhan stared at that handwriting and couldn't bring himself to start working for a long time. Then he began. 9 fragments, 9 scrolls laid out in a semicircle on the basement floor. He worked for 3 nights. He didn't sleep. He didn't eat. Sora brought him water, but he forgot to drink it. His migraine grew worse with every passing hour. His nose started bleeding on the second night. He wiped it with his sleeve and kept going. He checked each connection dozens of times. He took his time. He didn't force it. He remembered the 4 destroyed scrolls, the first outline. 3 unknown fragments of the sword came together. The foundation of the style, the framework, the second contour. The breathing rhythm settled over the framework like a second layer. The third. The evasion technique and the principle of redirecting force intertwined with the breathing rhythm. The fourth. Torso rotation. Jinhan nearly lost the structure. The rotation didn't fit the standard pattern. He hovered on the brink of collapse for 4 hours until he realized that the rotation should not follow the same direction as the blade, but the opposite. Reverse rotation for a reverse grip. The mirror principle. The 5th circuit. Elder Louis's 3 lines. The keystone. The connection between palm and blade. Feedback. The sword became an extension of the arm, not metaphorically, but literally. Chi flowed along the circuit, from the core through the channels into the palm, from the palm to the hilt, from the hilt to the blade, from the blade back along the trajectory of the strike. A closed cycle. A click. The 9 fragments became a single whole. The way of the reverse crane. The celestial sword technique. The first celestial rank he had attained. Jinhan placed the finished scroll on the floor. He fell onto his side and passed out. The migraine was so severe that he couldn't feel his body, only a throbbing pain behind his eyes. He slept for a full day. When he woke up, a cup of mountain herb tea stood nearby, and a piece of roasted meat lay on the floor. Sora was sitting by the wall cleaning her sword. She looked at him. He sat up. He picked up the scroll and handed it to her. She took it and unrolled it. Sora read the scroll for a long time, about 20 minutes. Then she went back to the beginning and read it again. Jinhan chewed on the meat and waited. She looked up. Her expression was strange. Not surprise, not joy, something else. Something Jinhan couldn't quite put a name to. She asked if he'd done it in 3 nights. He nodded. She asked how many scrolls he'd used. He said 9. She fell silent. Then she stood up. She took her sword. She went out onto the training ground. Jinhan finished his meat and followed her. Sora stood on the training ground. The scroll lay open on a rock nearby. She looked at the first form, reverse grip, left foot forward, breathing in the pattern she had read in the scroll. The first movement. The blade traced an arc from bottom to top, a familiar trajectory for her. But with the breathing rhythm from the scroll, the arc took on a different quality. The air crackled. Jinhan saw the chi pass through the blade and leave a white trail in the air. Thin, barely noticeable, but it was there. The chi was flowing through the blade. Sora paused. She looked at the trail, then at the sword, then at the scroll. She continued. The second movement. The third. She moved slowly, carefully, like a person walking through an unfamiliar room in the dark who suddenly realizes they know the location of every object. With each movement, her confidence grew. With each movement, the trail of chi in the air grew brighter. She reached the seventh movement, a twist of the torso, a reverse twist. She spun. The sword traced a full circle, and on the seventh movement, something happened. Jinhan could describe it only as resonance. Her chi, the sword's chi, and the chi in the air resonated in unison. The arena was bathed in white light. The stone beneath her feet cracked, not from the force of the blow, from the density of the chi. Sora stopped. She stood on the cracked stone, sword in hand. White trails of chi slowly faded into the air. She was silent. Jinhan was silent too. Then he saw that she was crying. Quietly, soundlessly. Tears streamed down her cheeks, and she didn't wipe them away. She stood there with the sword in her hand and cried. The three masters had told her she was flawed, that her style was a mistake, that she shouldn't have picked up a sword. For 3 years she'd been looking for someone who would say otherwise. She hadn't found anyone. And then there was the boy with the 4th level of body tempering, a scribe. He'd cobbled together a technique from scraps that didn't correct her style. One that was built around him. One that turned what everyone considered a defect into a heavenly rank weapon. She stood on the training grounds of the dead sect, and, for the first time in her life, felt that her style wasn't a mistake. It was a gift. Jinhan waited until she stopped crying. Then he told her she needed to work through the full form gradually, that she couldn't overload her channels with heavenly rank techniques right away, that she needed to start with the first 3 movements and add 1 each day. Sora wiped her face with her sleeve. She nodded. Then she said 4 words. She said she was staying. Jinhan nodded, as if it were obvious. To him, it was obvious. To her, those 4 words were worth 3 years of wandering. The next 2 months were spent working. Jinhan continued to study the scrolls. Sora trained, every day, from dawn. She mastered the way of the returning crane, movement by movement. Her progress was staggering. The heavenly technique, which fit her like a glove, accelerated her cultivation growth. In 2 months, she rose from the 6th level of body tempering to chi condensation. 2 major ranks in 2 months. Under normal circumstances, this would take years. Jinhan was progressing more slowly. He was at the 5th level of body tempering. He spent his time on scrolls, analyzing them and compiling them. He had compiled 4 more Earth-rank techniques over those 2 months. A basic body strengthening technique, a method for concealing chi, and the simplest offensive technique, a palm strike composed of 3 fragments, weak by the standards of true fighters, but for him it was a last resort weapon, and a method for purifying water using chi, useful, not combat-oriented, but in the mountains, clean water means life. Toward the end of the 2nd month, Liang Meihua appeared. She didn't come via the mountain trail but along the southern road leading from the city of Changlin. A short woman of 24 with a weary face and a sack on her back. Her clothes were dusty but intact. She wasn't wounded. She wasn't a fugitive. She was walking with a clear purpose. Sora intercepted her as she approached the sect's territory. Her hand was on her sword. Her gaze was stern. Meihua raised her open palms and introduced herself. A former apothecary from Changlin. The city had been ravaged by a band of mercenaries 3 weeks earlier. Her shop had been burned down, her supplies stolen. She had been heading north with no particular destination in mind. She'd heard in a village further down the slope that someone was living in the ruins of an old sect on Mount Lingyun. She decided to check it out. Maybe they'd let her stay in exchange for work. She knows how to prepare medicines. She knows herbs. She might be useful. Sora looked at Jinhang. Jinhang looked at Meihua. His scribe's eye activated automatically. He couldn't control it. The ability simply turned on whenever he saw something containing a chi structure. And Meihua possessed such a structure, an unusual one. Her chi was cold, not just cold but icy. Her meridians pulsed with energy that froze the air around her hands. Icy root, a rare type of qi. Jinhang said she could stay. Manhwa turned out to be exactly what she claimed to be, and even more. An apothecary, yes, but also a natural organizer. In her first week, she brought order to the basement that Jinhang had turned into chaos over 2 months. The scrolls he'd scattered across the floor were neatly gathered into stacks and placed on shelves that Manhwa had built from scraps of furniture. The supplies were sorted. The cooking schedule was drawn up.
The herb supplies were cataloged. Within 2 weeks, she knew where every scroll was and could find the one she needed in a minute. It took Jinhan half an hour to do the same. She cooked, simply, with whatever was available. Mountain herbs, game that Sora brought back. Roots, but the food was hot and served on time. For the first time in 3 months, Jinhan ate regularly and felt the difference. His headaches were less severe. His qi flowed more smoothly. He could concentrate for longer. Manhwa made him eat. He could work on the scrolls for days on end, forgetting about food and sleep. Manhwa would silently place a bowl next to him. If he didn't notice, she'd move the bowl closer. If he still didn't notice, she'd take the scroll from his hands and replace it with chopsticks. Sora would snort at this. A month later, Manhwa told him about her problem. Not directly. She asked if any of his scrolls had anything to do with alchemy. Jinhong said they did. A few fragments. She asked to take a look. He brought them. She read. He watched, and he saw her expression change. Hope, then disappointment. All the standard alchemical methods required fire qi. Heating, melting, sublimation. Basic operations that were impossible with the ice root. She set the scrolls aside, thanked him, and said it was nothing, that she was used to it. Jinhan didn't reply. He looked at the scrolls, and he saw what she didn't see. Among the green scrolls were 3 fragments of medical techniques based on cooling. Among the black ones lay a fragment description of the crystallization of spiritual substances. Without context, it seemed meaningless, but Jinhan saw the context. Crystallization instead of heating, freezing instead of melting, growth instead of sublimation, ice alchemy, not in spite of her qi type, but thanks to it. He set to work. It took 12 days to put together the alchemical method for Manhwa. This was a different kind of work, not like the way of the returning crane. Martial arts are the architecture of movement. Qi flows along familiar contours. Body, blade, and breath. 3 elements, 3 layers. Alchemy is chemistry, reactions between substances, the interaction of ingredients, temperatures, pressure, hundreds of variables, and each one had to be turned upside down. Because standard alchemy was based on heat, but he was creating a system based on cold. Jinhan found 6 fragments, 3 medical scrolls detailing cooling techniques, a fragment on crystallization from the Black Sect, half of the White Crane Sect's recipe handbook, and 1 scroll he found in the farthest corner of the warehouse, in a box that it hadn't been opened in so long that the hinges had rusted right through. The scroll contained a description of a process the author called lunar condensation. 4 lines, no beginning, no end. A torn fragment of something larger. But these 4 lines described the principle of transforming spiritual energy into a solid crystalline form at low temperatures, a principle that did not exist in any known alchemical treatise to the day. Jinhong understood why this scroll had been lying in a box that no one had opened. The author didn't know what to do with this principle, because the author didn't have a disciple with the ice root. For 12 days, he pieced the fragments together. 3 medical scrolls provided the foundation, the process of treating ingredients through the cold qi. Standard heating was replaced by step-by-step freezing, not mere cooling, but a controlled slowing of molecular motion. Crystallization became the central process. Instead of melting the ingredients and combining them into a single solution, Manhwa would grow them like crystals in a supersaturated solution, slowly, layer by layer. Each layer is a single ingredient. Each crystal is a finished elixir. The recipe compendium provided the formulas. Not all were suitable for ice processing. Jinhong selected 12 out of 40 and adapted each one. Lunar condensation became the final element, the keystone. The principle of transforming qi into a solid form allowed Manhwa not only to create elixirs, but also to seal her qi within them. Each elixir became a vessel for her energy, icy energy. This meant that her medicines would do more than just heal. They would cool inflammation, slow the effects of poisons, and freeze infections. A side effect that turned a weakness into a strength. The Moon Dew method. Earth rank, high, almost heavenly. To reach full heavenly rank, 2 elements were missing. Elements that Jinhuan simply did not possess. But even without them, it was an alchemical system that had no equal on the Jiulong continent. because no one had ever based alchemy on cold. He finished at dawn on the 13th day. The migraine was bearable. He was learning. Each new concoction came a little easier than the last. Not because it was getting easier, but because he had a better sense of the line between when he could push and when he couldn't. He took the scroll to manhwa. She was sitting by the hearth, sorting dried herbs. He placed the scroll beside her and said it was for her, that it was an alchemical method, that it worked with icy chi. Manhwa looked at him, then at the scroll. She unrolled it. She read for a long time, longer than Sora. She was an apothecary. She understood alchemy on a practical level. She saw what was written in the scroll and understood what it meant. Her hands began to tremble on the 3rd page. By the 5th, she pressed the scroll to her chest and closed her eyes. She didn't cry. Manhwa wasn't the type to cry, but her lips pressed together into a thin line and she couldn't speak for a long time. Then she said thank you, quietly, just once. Jinhan nodded and went to bed. Manhwa created her first elixir 3 days later, the simplest one, a restorative potion for healing wounds. She worked in the corner of the basement that Jinhan had set aside for her as a laboratory. The ingredients were laid out on a stone slab. Mountain herbs, mineral water from a stream, a piece of spiritual quartz that Sora had found on the mountainside. Manhwa sat down in front of the slab. She activated her chi. The temperature around her dropped. Frost covered the stone surface. She began the process, not boiling, but cultivation. Cold chi enveloped the ingredients. The herbs began to change color. The green darkened to blue. The mineral water solidified into a crystal. The spiritual quartz glowed from within. Slowly, layer by layer, the crystal grew on the stone slab. Sora stood in the doorway and watched. Jinhong sat against the wall, observing through the scribe's eye and monitoring the flow of chi. An hour later, the finished elixir stood on the slab. Not a vial of liquid like in standard alchemy, a crystal, the size of a thumbnail, blue, translucent. A light pulsed slowly inside it. It looked like a flower, an icy flower with petals of frozen chi. Manhwa took it in her hands. It didn't melt. Her chi sustained its structure. She looked at Jinhong. He saw something in her eyes that he hadn't seen before. Not gratitude, not surprise, belonging. She had found her place. That same evening, Jinhong made a decision. He needed money. For materials, for tools, for food that couldn't be obtained by hunting, for clothing. 3 people couldn't live in ruins forever. The sect needed resources. He had one way to obtain them, techniques. He spent the night selecting scrolls to sell. Not celestial ones, earthly ones. Good, solid earthly techniques that any small sect would buy without a second thought. He gathered 3. The fist strengthening method, the mountain stream breath, the swift wind step. Simple, effective, with no traces of his compilation style, no identifying marks of the White Crane sect, anonymous merchandise. In the morning, he told Manhwa that she needed to go down to the nearest trading town and find a middleman to sell the scrolls, not him. His face might be recognized. A former disciple of a destroyed sect on the loose is a risk. Manhwa wasn't surprised. She nodded and asked what price to set. He named the figures. Manhwa raised an eyebrow and said he was undervaluing them. That earthly technology of this caliber was worth at least twice as much. He didn't argue. Manhwa left the next morning. She returned 5 days later with a pouch of silver and a list of what could be bought in Liuha City with that money. She had sold 3 scrolls for enough to live on for half a year. And she brought news. The city was abuzz with talk of the Great Hunt. Emperor Zhou had announced that whoever gathered the complete set of the lost 9 heavenly arts would receive the title of Imperial Mentor. The entire continent was in an uproar. Sects, independent cultivators, shadowy organizations. Everyone was searching for the lost techniques. Everyone was hunting for ancient libraries, scrolls, and the legacies of defunct sects. Manhwa looked at Jinhong as she told him this. He understood why. The White Crane sect was among the top 3 most powerful. Its library was one of the largest on the continent, and 4 sects had destroyed it 50 years ago. They plundered the library. They took 3,000 techniques. They divided them among themselves. 50 years ago, long before he was born. The night of the ash moon didn't happen yesterday. It happened half a century ago. Jinhan hadn't witnessed the destruction. He was the last generation, a child taken in by an old man from a sect that was already dying.
Elder Louis, one of the few who still remembered the greatness of the White Crane, who tried to preserve at least something, who took in disciples and taught them to transcribe the scrolls, because he knew that one day even these remnants would disappear. And on that night, when the assassins came, not an army, but a squad, someone had decided to wipe out the last of them, to finish off what remained, to erase even the memory.
Manhwa said something else. Among the rumors on the black market, there was one that stood out. Someone had been asking about the scrolls from Mount Ling Yun. He wasn't selling, he was asking. He was interested in whether anything was left. It could have been a collector. It could have been a relic hunter for the Great Hunt. Or it could have been a scout from one of the 4 sects. Jinhan listened and said nothing. Then he asked who exactly had asked. Manhwa didn't know. The middleman hadn't given a name. He'd only described him, a middle-aged man, wearing expensive clothes, with a symbol on his belt, a lotus. An iron lotus. The Iron Lotus sect, the main organizer of the Night of the Ash Moon. They're still interested. 50 years later, they're still watching the mountain. Jinhan stood at the entrance to the basement and watched the sunset. Orange light flooded the sect's ruins. The black skeletons of the columns cast long shadows. Somewhere below, on the platform, Sora was practicing the 4th form of the Way of the Returning Crane. The sound of air being sliced through reached the basement, rhythmic and sharp. Inside, Manhwa was sorting through the materials she'd bought in town and arranging them on the shelves. 3 people, ruins, a basement full of discarded scrolls, and 4 sects somewhere out there beyond the horizon. 4 sects that, 50 years ago, destroyed everything he knew. That took 3,000 technicians, that killed generations of masters, and that are now sending people to check if anything is stirring among the bones. Jinhong returned to the basement. He sat down at the table. Before him lay 300 scrolls he hadn't yet cataloged. Rubbish, drafts, scraps, fragments that no one but him could read. He picked up the first scroll, unrolled it, and began to work, because that was the only thing he knew how to do, and because that was enough. A week after Manhwa returned from the city, 2 people appeared on the mountain trail. Sora was the first to spot them. She was standing on a section of ruined wall she used as a lookout post and saw 2 figures climbing up the southern slope. One walked with confidence. The other lagged behind and stumbled. Sora placed her hand on her sword and made her way down to the trail. Jinhong followed her out. Leading the way was a woman of about 22. Short, lean, short hair. Her movements were economical and precise. She saw Sora with her sword and stopped. She didn't tense up. She didn't reach for a weapon. She simply stopped and tilted her head slightly to the side, as if assessing them. Behind her stood a girl, 17 years old, thin to the point of transparency, pale skin, huge eyes. She was breathing heavily and clutching her side. The climb up the slope had been difficult for her. The woman introduced herself as Park Chae-young. She said she was looking for a scroll master from Mount Ling Yun. Sora asked who had told her. Chae-yun smiled. It was the kind of smile that made Jinhan unable to tell whether it was sincere or not. Chae-yun said that rumors spread quickly, especially rumors about earthly techniques that appear out of nowhere on the black market. She pointed to the girl behind her. She said that this was Han Yun-mi, that her meridians were scattered, that the 3 sects had rejected her, that the Imperial Academy had diagnosed her as incurable, that she had heard of a master who cures what others consider incurable. Jinhan looked at Yeon-mi. The scribe's eye activated, and he saw it. The chi channels in her body were not like everyone else's. For a normal cultivator, the channels are like rivers, wide, deep, with a clear course. Yeon-mi's channels were like a delta. One channel branched into 3. Each of those 3 branched into 5. Hundreds of the finest little streams instead of 12 main rivers. The chi was dispersing, like water in sand. It didn't gather strength. It didn't hold its course. It didn't allow for a single standard technique to be performed. For any healer, this was a defect, irreversible. Hopeless. Jinhan looked at this structure and didn't see a defect. He saw architecture. Complex, unusual, and incredibly familiar. He saw a similar principle in the Yellow Scrolls, formational techniques. Defensive and offensive arrays that required the distribution of chi across dozens of points simultaneously. A standard cultivator could not do this. His channels were too crude, too powerful, like trying to embroider with a blacksmith's forge needle. But Yeon-mi, hundreds of the finest channels, hundreds of distribution points. the perfect structure for working with formations. He told her to come in. Chae-young followed her in. Sora didn't take her hand off her sword. Manhwa prepared tea. Jinhan sat Yeonmi down on a bench in the basement and examined her channels for 2 hours. She sat motionless, patiently, as usual. She had undergone dozens of such examinations. Each one ended the same way, with a shake of the head. "I'm sorry, there's nothing we can do." Jinhan did not shake his head. He watched, he saw, and he was already searching for fragments. Among the green scrolls were medical techniques for working with meridians. Among the yellow ones were formation principles. Among the black ones lay a single scroll that he had marked as incomprehensible 3 months ago. Now he understood what it was. A description of the method of multiple circulation, a technique that allowed one to channel qi through multiple meridians simultaneously. Useless for an ordinary cultivator with 12 meridians, ideal for Yeonmi, who had hundreds. While Jinhan studied the scrolls, Chae-young sat in the corner and watched, quietly, intently. Her eyes moved from Jinhan to the scrolls, from the scrolls to Sora, from Sora to Manhwa. She noticed everything. She memorized everything. Sora saw this, and she didn't like it. That evening, when Yeonmi had fallen asleep from exhaustion, Sora pulled Jinhan aside. She said she didn't trust Chae-young, that she moved like a trained fighter, that her gaze was too piercing, that ordinary people don't observe like that. Jinhan nodded. He'd noticed it too, but he said that Yeonmi was genuine. Her channels couldn't be faked, her pain couldn't be acted out. And if Chae-young had brought her here, then at least part of what she was saying must be true. Sora clenched her jaw but said nothing. Jinhan had been working on a method for Yeonmi for 6 days. 6 scrolls, 3 medical ones, 2 formation ones, 1 black one with multiple circulation. He didn't try to repair her meridians. He didn't try to merge the streams back into the rivers. Instead, he built a system that utilized branching. The principle was the opposite of the standard one. Ordinary cultivation is concentration, gathering qi into a single point, to amplify it, to direct it. For Yeonmi, the method is distribution. To scatter qi across hundreds of points, to cover an area, to control space. A formation is an array of dozens of nodal points that must be fed qi simultaneously. An ordinary cultivator can maintain 3 or 4 nodes, 5 if they're a genius. Yeonmi, with her channel structure, could maintain 20, 30, maybe more. Each thin channel is a separate power line. Each little stream is a wire leading to its own node. A defect, an incurable defect that the 3 sects in the Imperial Academy had written off as hopeless. It turned out to be a gift that no one knew about, because no one had ever looked at the scattered meridians as a tool for formations. No one except the scribe who had spent 8 years copying formation scrolls and knew their structure by heart. Jinhan finished the assembly on the 6th day. He named the technique the Star Crane Network, Earth rank, but with Heaven rank potential, because the more nodes Yeonmi learned to hold, the more complex the formations she could build would become. This wasn't a technique with a ceiling, it was a technique with a staircase. He called for Yeonmi. She came, pale, quiet, with eyes that no longer held any hope. She'd been rejected too many times. She'd grown used to it. He didn't say anything. He simply placed a scroll in front of her and set a formation disc next to it. The simplest one, 22 nodes, a training formation he'd found in the yellow scrolls and reconstructed. He told her to read the scroll, then to try activating the formation. Yeonmi read, for a long time. Then she sat down in the center of the formation disc. She closed her eyes. She began to direct her qi along the path described in the scroll. Jinhan watched through the scribe's eye. Hundreds of thin channels in her body began to glow, not brightly, dimly, but all of them, at the same time. The qi flowed not as a single stream, but as 100 little streams. Each found its own node in the formation. The first node lit up, the second, the third, the fifth, the 10th. Yeonmi didn't open her eyes. Her face was tense. Her hands were trembling. The 15th node, the 18th, the 20th, the 21st, the 22nd. All 22 nodes of the formation glowed with a steady light. All at once, the basement was bathed in a soft, bluish glow. Sora stood by the wall, staring with wide-open eyes. Manhwa pressed her palm to her mouth. Chae-young sat in her corner, and for the first time ever, she wasn't wearing a mask. Her face showed shock. Yeonmi opened her eyes. She saw the light. She saw all 22 nodes glowing. All of them. Every single one. For the first time in her life, everything was working. She whispered, "They're all lit. All of them. For the first time in my life, everything is working." Then she began to cry. Not quietly like Sora, loudly, sobbing uncontrollably, like a child, like a 17-year-old girl who had been told her whole life that she was broken and who had just found out that she wasn't. Manhwa hugged her. Sora turned away, but Jinhan saw her wipe her eyes with the back of her hand. Chae-young silently left the basement. Jinhan found her on the roof an hour later. She was sitting on a piece of broken wall, staring at the sky. He sat down beside her, silently. After a minute, she spoke. Without turning her head, she said she'd lied, that she wasn't just a traveler who'd heard rumors, that she was a former agent of the secret chamber, Imperial Intelligence, a deserter. She'd fled after receiving an order she couldn't carry out. She found Yeonmi in a village in the south. The girl was dying of starvation and a disease caused by unstable channels. Chae-young didn't know why she'd taken her in. Maybe because she was tired of killing. Maybe because she wanted to save someone, at least once. She'd heard rumors about the Scroll Master and came here as a last resort. Jinhan listened. Then he asked one thing. He asked if the secret chamber posed a danger to them. Chae-young replied that it didn't. She was a low-ranking agent. They wouldn't come looking for her. It wasn't worth the effort. Jinhan nodded. He asked if she wanted to stay. She turned and looked at him for a long time. Then she said she did, but that she had her own problem, that her reconnaissance technique was destroying her, that every time she used chi camouflage, she lost a piece of herself, that soon she would forget her own name. Jinhan looked at her in silence. His transcriber's eye was active. He could see her chi. He could see the contours of the cloaking technique woven into the channels. He could see how they were erasing her own energetic signature. Not concealing it, erasing it. The difference between a blanket and an eraser. He said he'd take a look. Chae-young nodded. They sat on the roof in silence. Down below, Yeonmi was still sobbing. Manhwa was quietly saying something to her. Sora stood at the entrance keeping watch. 4 people, then 5. Jinhan looked at the stars and thought that among his scraps of paper lay the answers to questions he hadn't even asked yet. Jinhan had been working on Chae-young's technique for 9 days. It was the most difficult task he'd ever tackled. Combat techniques had a clear structure. Alchemical methods were based on chemistry. Formation techniques were based on geometry. The chi camouflage technique was based on deception, not physical, but mental. The 1,000 Faces method worked as follows. The cultivator suppressed their own energy signature and replaced it with someone else's. Copied, borrowed. To become invisible, one must cease to be oneself. The problem was embedded in the very foundation of the technique, not a mistake. Its design. Whoever created this method knew exactly what they were doing. For a short mission, the loss of identity was an acceptable price to pay. After a few days, the signature would be restored. But Chae-young had been using the method for years, non-stop, erasing herself layer by layer, like a stone underwater. Jinan broke the problem down into its components. Problem number 1. The method erased the signature instead of hiding it. The erasure had to be replaced with concealment. Problem number 2. The borrowed signatures had accumulated in her channels like foreign imprints. He needed to clear them out without damaging her own signature, which still remained. Problem number 3. Even if he fixed the method, he'd have to restore what had already been erased. Give her back what she'd lost. For the first problem, he found a solution among the Black Scrolls, an ancient meditative method, useless in standard applications. 3 pages describing the technique of inner concealment, not chi camouflage, concealment of consciousness, a method monks used for deep meditation. They didn't erase themselves, they withdrew inward, like a snail in its shell. The outside world could no longer see them because they stopped emitting energy. They didn't disappear, they hid. Jinhan took this principle and began to incorporate it into the structure of Chae-young's concealment. Instead of erasing the signature, the method would wrap it up, like a blanket. The signature remains, alive, intact, but invisible. For the second problem, he used 3 medical scrolls, techniques for cleansing the channels of foreign impurities, fragmentary, incomplete, but combined, they covered all 12 main channels. For the third problem, he had no solution. You can't restore what's been erased. You can't recall what's been forgotten, but you can create an anchor, a point to which memory will return. He found this anchor in a strange place. Among the yellow scrolls, the formation principle, the fixation node, a point in the formation that neither generates nor conducts energy. It simply exists, immovable, constant, the center around which everything revolves. Jinhan incorporated this principle into Chae-young's technique as a point of return, the eye point. Every time she uses the disguise, she will return to this point, just as a compass returns to north. 5 fragments, a meditative method, 3 purification techniques, the formation principle, earth rank, not heavenly rank. To achieve heaven rank, the entire architecture of the Thousand Faces method would have had to be reworked. But Jinhan didn't have the original scroll. He worked only with what was inside Chaeyun. It's like repairing a house from the inside without a blueprint. But an earth rank with the correct principle is better than a heavenly rank with a destructive one. He showed Chaeyun the result. She listened to his explanation in silence. Then she asked for some time. She went out onto the roof. Jinhan didn't follow her. 3 hours later, she returned. Her face was calm. Her eyes were red. She said she'd tried a new method, that she'd activated the camouflage, and for the first time in 5 years, her own name hadn't disappeared. It was there, inside, under the blanket. She said she had sat on the roof watching the sunset and remembered everything: her real name, her mother's face, the smell of the house where she grew up, things she'd thought were lost forever. Jinhan nodded. He said she needed to practice the new method every day to strengthen the point of return, that the old traces of others' signatures would fade gradually, that the process would take months. Chaeyun nodded. Then she said 2 things. First, she's staying. Forever. Not just for a while, not until conditions improve. Forever. Second, she said she had reconnaissance skills and wanted to use them to protect the sect. That she could be their eyes and ears, that she needed a network of informants in the towns and villages around the mountain, that she knew how to build it. Jinhan agreed. Now there were 5 of them: a swordswoman, an alchemist, a spy, a formation master, and a scribe who gathered weapons from scrap for each of them. The next 2 months flew by. Everyone found their place. Sora trained and hunted. She mastered 8 of the 12 forms of the Way of the Returning Crane. Her cultivation level reached the 2nd stage of qi condensation. Manhwa brewed elixirs and managed the household. Her ice crystals became more complex and effective with each passing week. She mastered 4 recipes: restorative, purifying, fortifying, and one she created herself without Jinhan's help: pain relieving. Jinhan found out about this when she silently placed a crystal on his desk just as he was writhing in pain from a migraine after yet another build. The crystal relieved the pain within minutes. He looked at Manhwa. She smiled and said it was a side effect of one of the recipes and that she thought it might come in handy for him. Chaeyun was building an information network. Once a week, she would go down to the towns and villages. She would return with news. Yeonmi was studying formations, quietly and obsessively. She found about 12 formation diagrams of varying complexity and methodically mastered them one by one. She started with the simplest, a signal formation, 12 nodes. She set it up on the trail leading to the sect. Now anyone climbing the slope would trigger the signal. Then a defensive formation, 20 nodes, weak, but sufficient to slow down an ordinary bandit. Then another one, and another. 2 months later, the sect's territory was enveloped in a network of 5 formations: signal formations, defensive formations, one diversionary formation that created the illusion of an empty slope for casual passers-by. Yeonmi controlled all 5 simultaneously without any visible strain. The 22 nodes in the training formation were just the beginning. She could maintain 60. Jinhan watched her and realized that her potential was much greater. She wasn't just capable, she was a genius at formations, a genius whom the whole world considered a failure. Jinhan himself had mastered 6 more techniques over those 2 months: 4 earth techniques, 2 for sale, 2 for the training set he'd begun to put together. Basic techniques for future students. Simple, effective, accessible to beginners. And 2 celestial ones. He spent 3 weeks assembling one of them from 11 fragments, the Shield of Lunar Radiance, a defensive technique that created a barrier of condensed qi, not for himself, for Manhwa, because an alchemist working in the rear needed protection, and Manhwa was not a fighter. He started assembling the second one but never finished it. It required a fragment he didn't have. He knew which one. He could see the gap in the structure. He knew the shape of the missing piece. But among the more than 500 scrolls in the basement, that piece did not exist. The first wall, the first limit of his junk pile. He couldn't create from nothing, only from what he had, and his supply was finite. Chaeyun brought news in the 3rd month. Bad news. Scouts from the Iron Lotus sect had been spotted in a village at the foot of the mountain. 3 of them, mid-rank cultivators, qi condensation, 4th or 5th level. They were questioning the locals. Who lives up there? How many of them there are? What they do? The locals didn't know the details. The Yeonmi formation hid the sect from prying eyes. But the very fact that someone lived on Mount Lingyun was common knowledge. Smoke from a campfire. Traces on the trails. Manhwa coming down to go shopping. It's impossible to hide everything. Chi-young suggested 2 options. First, leave. Abandon the mountain. Find another place. Hide. Second, stay and prepare. Sora said she had no intention of leaving. Manhwa remained silent and looked at Jinhang. Yeonmi cowered in the corner. Chi-young waited. Jinhang thought. For a long time. Then he said they were staying. That this was Mount Lingyun, the mountain of the White Crane sect. That he wouldn't let them be driven from their own land. That they had time. The scouts weren't a combat unit. They would observe and report. Then command would make a decision. Then they'd send a unit. Weeks, maybe a month. That was enough. He began to prepare. Not for battle, for defense. First, he reinforced Yeonmi's formations. He found 3 new formation fragments among the yellow scrolls and used them to create a reinforcement for the defensive barrier. Yeonmi integrated it into the existing network in 2 days. The barrier became denser. It wouldn't stop a serious cultivator, but it would slow them down. Next, he turned his attention to what he'd been avoiding, his own combat techniques. For 3 months, he'd been creating weapons for others. For himself, he had only a weak Earth-rank palm strike, useless against a chi condensation cultivator. He went through the scrolls. There were 43 combat fragments after losing 4 in his first failed attempt. Of those, 20 were unsuitable for his level. They required too much chi. From the remaining 23, he selected 13. Not for attacking. He wasn't a fighter. He wouldn't become one. His cultivation at the 5th level of body tempering did not allow him to deliver strikes capable of piercing the defenses of even a weak cultivator. But he didn't need to attack. He needed to survive. 13 fragments, 7 movement techniques, 3 evasion techniques. 2 principles for predicting the trajectory of a strike. 1. Fragment of something the author called reading intent, a method for determining the direction of an attack based on the opponent's micro-movements a fraction of a second before the strike. Half a fragment, practically useless without the second part. But Jinhan realized he didn't need the second part. The principle of reading intent coincided with the principle of the scribe's eye. He could already see structures, chi flows, energy movements. If he could read the architecture of the scroll, he could also read the architecture of an attack. He began the assembly. 17 fragments, more than ever before. The work was arduous. Each connection required precision like that of a jeweler. Twice the structure began to tremble, and he stopped. He stepped back. He breathed. He started over. A migraine set in on the 2nd day and wouldn't go away. Manhwa brought him pain-relieving crystals every 4 hours. Without them, he wouldn't have been able to continue. On the 5th day of assembly, Chae-young brought a new message. The scouts had left the village. But before leaving, one of them had sent a pigeon eastward, toward the headquarters of the Iron Lotus sect. The report had been sent. The clock was ticking. Jinhan worked faster. He didn't rush. Working faster isn't the same as rushing. He cut back on his breaks. He slept for 2 hours at a time. He ate when Manhwa placed chopsticks in his hand. On the 7th day, there was a click. The 17 fragments became one. The step of the last crane. Not an attack. Not a defense. Evasion. Absolute evasion. A technique that allowed him to read his opponent's intent and move before the strike began. Not faster than the strike. Before the strike. The difference was enormous. Faster meant reacting. Before meant anticipating. Earth rank. But high Earth. Very high. On the verge of the heavenly rank. For a fighter with powerful chi, this technique would be useful but not exceptional. For Jinhang, with his frail body and meager reserves, it was ideal. Because it required neither strength nor endurance nor power. Only understanding. Only the ability to see. And he could see better than anyone else. At the same time, he was training the others. Sora had mastered all 12 forms of the Way of the Returning Crane. Manhwa had received the Shield of Lunar Radiance. Yeonmi had expanded her formation network to 7 systems. Chae-young had received a revised disguise and could now conduct reconnaissance without losing herself. 2 weeks after the pigeon, they arrived. Not 30, not elite. 6. Combat reconnaissance. A reconnaissance squad. 2 cultivators at the 4th stage of chi condensation. 3 at the 2nd, 1 at the 5th. The commander, the strongest. For Jinhan, at the 5th stage of body tempering, any one of them posed a deadly threat. For Sora, at the 2nd stage of chi condensation with her celestial techniques, they were adversaries. Dangerous, but not invincible. Yeonmi sensed them first. The signal formation on the lower trail had been activated half an hour before their arrival. Jinhan had time to prepare. He assigned everyone to their positions. Sora at the eastern entrance, the main strike force. Chae-young in the shadows, invisible. Manhwa was in the basement. The shield was activated, ready to heal. Yeonmi was at the center of the formation network. She controlled all 7 systems. Jinhan himself was next to Yeonmi, not because he was hiding, because his task was to coordinate. They arrived at sunset, 6 of them in the uniforms of the Iron Lotus sect. Black fabric with a silver flower on the chest. The commander was in front, a man in his 30s, a calm expression. His movements were confident. He stopped at the edge of the territory and looked around. He saw the ruins. He saw the restored sections. He noticed the formations. His eyebrows rose. He hadn't expected formations. He'd expected a vagrant in the ruins, not a fortress. He said something to his men. 2 of them spread out. The commander stepped forward. Yeonmi activated a diversionary formation. The path in front of the commander shifted. An illusion. He stepped in the direction that seemed clear and walked into the zone of the slowing barrier. His body was enveloped in viscous chi. He broke through it in 3 seconds. The barrier couldn't hold him back. But 3 seconds is an eternity in battle. Sora emerged from behind a piece of the ruined wall, sword in a reverse grip, the first form of the way of the returning crane. The blade traced an upward arc. A white trail of chi sliced through the air. The commander blocked. His sword met Sora's strike and deflected it. But the trajectory of the reverse grip was unfamiliar. The block was off target. Sora's blade slid past his defense and left a cut on his forearm. A small one, harmless, but the first. The commander retreated. His expression changed. He no longer viewed this as a mop-up operation. 2 of his men who had spread out stumbled upon Chae-young, or rather they didn't stumble upon her. They walked right past her without noticing. She was standing just 2 steps away, invisible. Chi camouflage, a new form of camouflage that didn't erase but concealed. One of them turned his back. Chae-young struck, not with a sword, with her fingertips striking a specific point on his neck, a technique from the secret chamber, not a combat technique. Nervous paralysis. The cultivator collapsed. The second one turned around. Chae-young had already vanished. She dissolved into the shadows. He searched. He spun around. He sensed for chi all around him. Nothing. Emptiness. She was 3 steps away from him. Yeonmi activated the trapping formation. 14 nodes. The ground beneath the second cultivator's feet glowed. Lines of chi closed in around his legs. They couldn't hold him. He broke free, but lost his balance. Chae-young struck again. The second one fell, 3 against 3. The commander against Sora. The 2 remaining fighters against Yeonmi's formations and Chae-young's phantom attacks. The battle lasted 20 minutes. Not epic, dirty, crowded, amid ruins and debris. Sora held the commander at bay. She wasn't winning. She was holding him off. Her technique was of the heavenly rank, but her cultivation was lower. The difference in chi rank was offset by the difference in the quality of her technique. A balance. Unstable, but sufficient. The other 2 broke through Yeonmi's formations. The barrier slowed them down but didn't stop them. They were heading toward the basement, toward Jinhan. The first one reached the entrance. Manhwa activated the Moonlight Shield. A barrier of condensed chi sealed off the passage. The cultivator struck. The shield wavered but held. He struck again. A crack. A third strike. The shield shattered. The cultivator stepped inside. Jinhan stood before him. The 5th level of body tempering against the 4th level of chi condensation. A full 2 ranks apart. Like a child against an adult. The cultivator struck. Jinhan stepped forward. The last crane step. He saw the strike before it even began. A micro movement of the shoulder, chi shifting to the right hand. The trajectory was known a split second before it began. His body shifted to the right. The cultivator's fist whizzed past his temple by a centimeter. The wind from the blow ruffled his hair. A second strike, left, from below. Jinhan shifted backward. A third, a circular strike. He ducked. A fourth, he retreated. Not quickly, not powerfully, fluidly, like water flowing around a rock. The cultivator struck. Struck. Not a single blow landed. 7 seconds. 8, 9. The cultivator roared with fury and poured all its chi into a single strike. Jinhan saw the setup, saw the focus, saw the direction, and did the only thing he could. He fell. He simply fell to the floor. The blow passed over him and smashed the shelf holding the scrolls. Debris of wood and paper flew into the air. At that moment, Sora finished her fight with the commander, the 11th form of the way of the returning crane, a reverse spin with a downward arc. The blade cut through the commander's guard and left a deep gash on his thigh. The commander fell to one knee. Sora didn't finish him off. She turned and rushed into the basement. She burst through the destroyed entrance. She saw the cultivator standing over Jinhan, the 12th form, complete. The finishing blow of the way of the returning crane. A white light. A crash. The cultivator flew toward the wall and slammed into the stone. It didn't get back up. The second cultivator, who was heading toward the basement, saw what had happened to the first one. He saw Sora enter the basement and what came of it. He turned and ran down the slope toward the commander, who was already limping back up. They were leaving, 5 of them. They were dragging the 2 paralyzed men along. The commander was carrying one over his shoulder. The 6th remained lying against the basement wall, unconscious, alive. Morning. The battle was over. Sora stood at the entrance to the basement. She was breathing heavily. Blood from a cut on her shoulder dripped onto the stone. She looked at Jinhuan. He was sitting on the floor amid the shattered shelves and scattered scrolls, unharmed. She told him that next time he should hide instead of acting as a target. He replied that he wasn't acting as a target, that he was dodging. She looked at him, at his scrawny scribe's body, at his hands without a single callus from a sword, and said nothing. But Jinhan saw the corner of her mouth twitch. After the battle, Jinhan didn't celebrate. He counted the losses. The stack of scrolls was destroyed. 32 scrolls were damaged. 9 were destroyed. 9 fragments were lost forever. Among them were 2 of the yellow ones he'd planned to use to strengthen the Yeonmi formations. He stood over a pile of torn paper and scattered ink, and felt something heavy and cold rising inside him. Every lost scroll was a closed door, an opportunity that would never open again. He couldn't create from nothing, only from what he had, and his supply was dwindling. Sora noticed the look on his face. She asked if everything was all right. He said yes. He lied. The captured cultivator came to around noon. Chae-yun was interrogating him, professionally, without cruelty, without threats. She simply asked questions in a tone that made him answer before he had time to think. The result of the interrogation. The squad was sent by the deputy head of the Iron Lotus sect, not by Cho Muggen himself, but by his deputy. Muggen isn't aware of the details yet. For him, Mount Lingyun is a minor issue. Some people live in the ruins, vagrants, scavengers, not worth the head's attention. The deputy sent out the reconnaissance team on his own initiative because rumors of a heavenly rank artifact on the black market had, after all, reached his ears. When the squad returns with a report that 5 people with formations and a heavenly rank swordswoman are living in the ruins, the situation will change. Muggen will take notice. Muggen will send a real squad, not 6, 30, 50, as many as it takes. Chae-yong asked how much time they had. The prisoner said he didn't know. But the journey to Iron Lotus headquarters takes 10 days. 10 days there, 10 days back, plus the time needed to make a decision. A month, maybe a month and a half. Jinhan released the prisoner. Sora objected. Chae-yun raised an eyebrow. Manhwa remained silent. Yeonmi stared wide-eyed. Jinhan said he wouldn't kill the prisoner, and he couldn't hold him. They had neither the space, nor the resources, nor the ability to guard him day and night. Let him go. Let him tell them what he saw. It might even be useful. Let him tell them about the formations, about the swordswoman. Let him tell them that these aren't just vagabonds, that there's someone serious here. The more serious they appear, the more cautious Mugong will be. Caution means time, and time is what they need most of all. Chae-yong nodded. She said there was logic to it. Grim logic, but logic nonetheless. The captive was released. He walked down the slope without looking back. Jinhan began preparing for what was bound to happen. Not in a month, not in half a year, not in a year. He was looking beyond the immediate threat. 5 people couldn't stand up to a sect, not even with celestial techniques, not even with formations. The difference in numbers decides everything when quality is roughly equal. He needed disciples. He needed a sect, not just a name, not just a facade, a real sect. People who would train in his techniques, who would stand on the walls, who would give him depth in defense. But for that, he needed a reputation. He needed people to want to come. To want to rally under the banner of a sect that had been destroyed 50 years ago and was now being revived by a young scribe. He made 2 decisions. First, to officially announce the revival of the White Crane sect. Not to hide, not to go into hiding. To stand up and declare to the entire continent, the White Crane lives on.
Second, to create a set of training techniques. Not heavenly ones, not special ones, basic ones, simple ones, accessible to any beginner. Techniques that would show potential students that the sect could offer them more than any other school. Because other schools teach students standard techniques, the same for everyone. But Jinhen could give each person exactly what suited them. He worked, every day, from morning till night. He gathered technique after technique, earth-level ranks, simple, reliable, a breathing method for beginners, basic physical conditioning, 3 variations, for the large-framed, for the light-footed, for those of average build, basic fist techniques, basic kicking techniques, the simplest weapon techniques, adaptable, for the sword, for the spear, for the staff. Each technique was composed of 2 or 3 segments, quick, relatively safe. His migraines came less often. He was getting used to it. His brain was adapting to the strain. Or perhaps his ability was growing. He couldn't say for sure. In a month, he had put together 12 training techniques, the training core, a set that an average sect would take decades to develop. He created it in 30 days, out of trash. Manhwa wrote an announcement in beautiful calligraphic script on sheets of paper that Cheong hung up in 3 towns and 7 villages around Mount Lingyun. The White Crane sect announces its revival. Students are being accepted, men and women, any age, any skill level, any background. Training is free, room and board provided. The only requirement? A willingness to work. The first student showed up 4 days later, a 16-year-old boy from a village at the foot of the mountain. Skinny, dirty, no cultivation, no talent in the opinion of everyone around him. He came because he had nowhere else to go. Jinhan looked at him. Through the eye of the recorder, he saw the boy's channels. Narrow, weak, but even, straight, without defects, without peculiarities. The most ordinary set of channels one could possibly have. He sat the boy down, gave him the Dawn Crane method, the first technique from the training core, told him to begin. The boy began. By the end of the second week, 4 more had arrived. By the end of the month, 10. By the end of the second month, 23. Not all of them stayed. 5 left in the first week. It was tough, boring, ruins, a basement. Not what they'd expected from a great sect. But 18 stayed. 18 people who went out to the restored training ground every morning and practiced the techniques. Sora led the training. Tough, demanding, no leniency. The students both feared and respected her. Manhwa fed everyone. The sect's budget had become a real problem. 23 mouths to feed. Jinhan was developing techniques to sell more quickly, 2 Earth-type techniques per week. Manhwa sold them through a network of intermediaries that Cheong had built up. There was just enough money. Barely. Cheong organized security and reconnaissance. 4 students with the best results in chi camouflage were assigned as patrols. They monitored the trails and roads around the mountain. Yeonmi taught 3 students the basics of formation work. One of them showed promise. Not brilliant, but sufficient. She beamed when she spoke of him. For the first time, she had someone to whom she could pass on her knowledge. Jinhan watched all this and felt something strange. Not pride, not satisfaction. Anxiety, because he was at the center of it all. He created the techniques everyone used. He solved problems no one else could solve. He was indispensable, and indispensability isn't a strength, it's a vulnerability. If he were killed, everything would collapse. The techniques would remain, but there would be no new ones. There would be no adaptation. There would be no growth. The sect would stagnate and die a slow death. He thought about this at night when everyone was asleep. He sat in the basement among the scrolls and thought. He didn't find an answer, but he found something else. Among the black scrolls, in the farthest corner of the storeroom, in a box he hadn't opened before because it was marked Dispose of, Copy Unusable. He opened the box. Inside lay a single scroll, old, very old. The paper had darkened with age. The edges were frayed. The ink had faded. He unrolled the scroll and activated the transcriber's eye, and he saw emptiness. Not damage. Not erased text.
Emptiness. His ability, which could read the structure of any technology, which saw flows and nodes and connections, showed nothing. A blank page, as if the scroll were empty. But it wasn't empty. Jinhan saw text. He saw symbols. He saw diagrams. They were right before his eyes, but his ability couldn't read them. For the first time ever, the celestial binding had failed him. He sat over the scroll until dawn. He turned it over and over, examined it, tried again and again. Emptiness. Emptiness every time. He didn't know what it was. Didn't know why it was lying in a box marked for disposal. Didn't know why his ability was silent. But he knew one thing. This scroll was important. More important than anything he had found so far. He hid the scroll separately from the rest. In a niche in the wall behind a shelf. He wrapped it in cloth. He didn't tell anyone. Not yet anyway. 5 months after the sect's revival, Kang Soo-hyun appeared on Mount Linyan. She came alone, unarmed, dressed in fine dark silk, with perfect posture and a face that betrayed no emotion. She passed through all of the Yoni formations. She didn't break through them. She didn't bypass them. She simply walked on. The formations detected her presence but didn't react to her as a threat, because she wasn't hostile. Her chi was steady and controlled. No intention to fight, no hidden aggression, just a person walking along the path. Sora met her at the eastern entrance, her hand on her sword, her gaze stern. Soo-hyun stopped. She introduced herself. She gave her full name, Kang Soo-hyun, daughter of Che Mugon, head of the Iron Lotus sect. Sora drew her sword. Soo-hyun didn't flinch. She stood. She remained calm. Her hands were lowered at her sides. Her gaze was fixed directly on the blade of Sora's sword, and, beyond it, on her eyes. She said she had come to speak with the sect leader, that she had a proposal, that she was unarmed. Sora did not sheath her sword. She called for Jinhan. He stepped out. He looked at Soo-hyun. The scribe's eye activated, and Jinhan saw something he hadn't expected. Her chi was powerful. Core formation rank, 3rd stage. Higher than Sora's, significantly higher than his own. But the structure was irregular. The core pulsed erratically, like a heart with arrhythmia. The channels were unnaturally dilated, like pipes pumping more water than they were designed for. Wear and tear, degradation. He could see it clearly. Her body had been pushed beyond its limits. Someone had forced her to grow too quickly, too aggressively, and now the system was falling apart. He invited her into the basement. Sora followed them, her hand never leaving her sword. Chaeyoung emerged from the shadows and sat in a corner. Manhwa made tea. Yeonmi stood at the entrance, nervously twisting the cuff of her sleeve. Soo-hyun sat upright. Her back didn't touch the wall. Her hands rested on her knees, a perfect posture, well-trained. She spoke in an even voice, without inflection. She said her father had sent her, that her mission was to infiltrate the sect, to discover the source of their techniques, to find out what kind of master was creating heavenly ranks out of nothing, to report back, to return with the stolen scrolls if possible. She said all this calmly, as if she were reading from a report. Sora took a step forward. Jinhan raised his hand. Sora stopped. He asked why she was telling them this. If she was a spy, why reveal her mission? Soo-hyun was silent for 5 seconds. Then she said she had a reason. That her core was deteriorating. That in 5 years, she would lose her cultivation completely. That her father knew this. That he'd sent her on this mission precisely because she was expendable. To be used while she still worked, to be discarded when she broke down. She said this in the same even tone, without self-pity, without anger toward her father, as a matter of fact. Jinhan listened and looked at her core through the transcriber's eye. The degradation was severe, but not irreversible. He saw a pattern. The core wasn't breaking down, it was burning out. Like a muscle forced to work without rest. If the load were removed and the recovery cycle reset, if a way were found to replace the damaged layers of the core with new ones, he asked what she wanted. Soo-hyun fell silent again. Longer. 7 seconds. 8. Then she said she didn't know. That her whole life she'd been told what to want, where to go, what to do. That she didn't know how to want things for herself. And that this was the first time anyone had ever asked. Jinhan nodded. He said she could stay, that he'd try to help with the core, that it would take time, months, maybe years, that the process would be painful, that there were no guarantees. Sora objected sharply. She said it was a trap. That Mugon's daughter in their sect was a knife in the back, waiting for the right moment. That you can't trust the enemy. Chae Young remained silent. She looked at Soo-hyun from her corner, appraisingly. Mei-hwa poured tea and didn't interfere. Yeon-mi stood in the doorway, looking first at Sora and then at Jin-han. Jin-han looked at Sora. He said he understood her fears, that she was right, that there was a risk, but that he could see the core of Soo-hyun and could see that the deterioration was real, that it couldn't be faked, that pain couldn't be acted out. Sora clenched her teeth. She said it was his decision as the sect leader, but that she would keep an eye on Soo-hyun every hour of every day. Soo-hyun listened to this exchange with the same impassive expression, but Jin-han noticed that her fingers on her knees trembled slightly, the first crack in the mask. He began working on a method to restore the core the very next day. It was a task he had never tackled before. Not creating a new piece of technology, not assembling it from fragments, repairing a living core. Like fixing an engine that's still running. You can't stop it, you can't turn it off. You can only replace parts on the fly. He studied Soo-hyun's core for 3 days, 2-hour sessions. She sat motionless. He scanned layer by layer. The damage was extensive. 12 layers of the core, 7 of which were worn out, 3 critically so. The Iron Lotus sect's method, which they'd used for her accelerated training, was based on the principle of burning. Burn potential to gain power now. To borrow from the future and never pay it back. To reverse the process, the damaged layers had to be replaced. Not repaired, replaced. New ones had to be grown over the old ones, slowly, layer by layer. Just as Mei-hwa had grown her crystals, layer by layer. He found 4 scrolls, 2 medical methods for restoring the channels, 1 breathing technique for slowing the circulation of qi. It allowed the load on the core to be reduced to a minimum, and 1 green scroll that described a technique for layer-by-layer growth of spiritual tissue. A fragment, incomplete, without an ending, but the beginning was detailed enough. 4 fragments. He began piecing them together, carefully, more slowly than ever before, because this technique would be applied not to a dead scroll but to a living person. A mistake here isn't just the loss of a piece of paper. A mistake here meant a shattered core and the cultivator's death. He worked for 8 days. The migraine was constant, a background hum. He grew accustomed to it, just as one grows accustomed to the sound of rain outside the window. Mei-hwa brought him pain-relieving crystals every 6 hours. He slept for 3 hours at a time. He ate according to the schedule that Mei-hwa had hung on the basement wall, and he followed it because she stood silently beside him until he had eaten everything. On the 9th day, the technique was ready. The Lotus Return Method, Earth rank, no higher. A critical element was missing for Heaven rank, the principle of regenerating spiritual tissue at the cellular level. But even Earth rank was sufficient. The process would be long, painful. Each session involved destroying 1 damaged layer and building up a new one, like peeling away the scab from a wound and waiting for new skin to grow. Over and over again. 12 layers, 7 damaged ones. Each layer takes 2 to 3 weeks to heal. The full course takes 2 years. 2 years of regular sessions. 2 years of pain. He explained all of this to Soo-hyun, in detail, without sugarcoating it. She listened, her face impassive, her hands on her knees, a perfect posture. When he finished, she asked one thing. She asked why he was doing this. Jin-han didn't understand the question. She clarified. She asked why he was wasting time and resources on an enemy, on the daughter of a man who would destroy his sect if he could. On a spy who had come to steal his secrets. Why? He thought about his answer. Then he said that she wasn't an enemy. That an enemy is someone who chooses to be an enemy. And she hadn't chosen anything. Ever. And that before she could become anyone, she had to learn to choose. Soo-hyun looked at him for a long time. Then she nodded. Once. And for the first time ever, her face twitched. Not a smile, not tears, just a crack in the mask that grew slightly wider. They held the first session that same evening. Soo-hyun sat in the center of the basement. Jin-han sat across from her. He guided his qi along the contours of the Lotus Return Method. His qi entered her core. It found the damaged layer. It began the destruction. Soo-hyun didn't scream. She didn't moan. She sat motionless, but sweat was pouring off her in streams. Her fingers dug into her knees until her knuckles turned white.
Her teeth were clenched so tightly that her jaw muscles twitched on her cheekbones. The pain was excruciating. Jinhan could see it. An hour later, he stopped. A third of the first layer had been destroyed. Soohyun opened her eyes. She looked at him, calmly, without reproach, without complaint.
She asked when the next session would be. He said in 3 days. She nodded. She stood up. She walked out of the basement on steady legs. After 10 steps, her knees buckled. Manhwa caught her by the elbow. Soohyun looked at her with an expression that Jinhan could describe with only one word: bewilderment. No one had ever caught her before when she fell. 6 months had passed since the sect's revival. 52 disciples, restored buildings on the eastern slope. The training ground had been cleared and paved with new stone. The library was in a separate pavilion. 30 techniques on the shelves, 10 celestial ones. Jinhan stood by the library window, looking down at the training ground below. Sora was leading the morning training session. 20 disciples in neat rows were practicing the basic forms. Their movements were synchronized, precise. Half a year ago, half of them couldn't hold a stance for 10 seconds. Now they were cultivators. Weak ones, beginners, but genuine ones. Jinhan had reached the core formation stage, the first tier. A mediocre result for a cultivator of his age. Most talented students reached this stage by the age of 16. He was 20. But his time wasn't spent on cultivation. His time was spent on what he did better than anyone else on the continent: creating. In 6 months, he had assembled 41 techniques, 27 Earth level, 12 Heaven level, 2 unfinished ones awaiting missing fragments, and he attempted to assemble a Divine level one. The attempt was calculated, not spontaneous. He spent 3 weeks preparing. He selected 26 fragments. He mapped out the architecture on paper. He checked every connection theoretically. He verified compatibility at every junction. On paper, the design was perfect. In practice, it fell apart at the 19th completion. Not catastrophically. No scrolls were lost. He managed to stop before reaching the critical point. But 3 of the 26 fragments were damaged and rendered unusable. 3 precious celestial fragments. He sat on the basement floor at 3 in the morning. He stared at the damaged scrolls. A migraine squeezed his temples like a vice. And for the first time in a long while, he felt doubt. Not in his ability, in himself. The celestial binding worked. It worked perfectly on both the earthly and celestial planes. But the divine rank demanded something more. Something he didn't yet understand. Maybe he lacked strength. Maybe understanding. Maybe experience. Or maybe he just wasn't good enough. Manhwa found him in the morning. He was sleeping on the floor among the scrolls. She didn't wake him. She covered him with a blanket. She placed some tea and a pain-relieving crystal next to him. Then she sat down to work at the table next to him, quietly, so as not to wake him. When he woke up, she said one thing. She said that he was creating for everyone, that every night he worked on other people's techniques, on other people's problems, on other people's power. But who creates for him? Jinhan didn't know how to respond. News from the continent came through Chae-young and Ha-il. Moon Ha-il. She appeared 3 months after the sect's revival. She walked through the main gate as if she were coming home, her jewelry jingling, loud, with a sack of scrolls on her back and the smile of a merchant who knows the price of everything, including her own charm. She proposed a deal, rare scrolls in exchange for a single consultation. Jinhan asked what kind of consultation. Ha-il placed a scroll in front of him and asked him to appraise it. He looked at it. He activated the scribe's eye. The scroll contained a fragment of an appraisal technique, not for objects but for people. The ability to instantly determine a person's essence, their intentions, and their nature. The ability was broken. It hadn't worked since her clan was wiped out. She told her story. Wandering merchant cultivators. Her clan was destroyed by the secret chamber for smuggling scrolls. She survived. Her ability was broken. She can't tell who to trust. She trades. She travels. She doesn't stay anywhere for long. Because she can't tell who around her is genuine and who isn't. Jinhan found a solution in 4 days. Among the green scrolls lay a fragment of an empathic method, a snippet of a technique for reading emotions through qi. Useless on its own, but when integrated into Hale's assessment method, it transformed the entire structure. The assessment ceased to be a cold calculation. It became a feeling. Not the price, the essence. Ha-il received the revised method. She activated it. She looked at Jinhan and fell silent for an entire day. When Sora asked what had happened, Ha-il replied that nothing had.
that he was genuine, that she'd forgotten what that looked like. Ha'il didn't stay. She left the next day. But she returned 2 weeks later, with new scrolls, with news, with the chaos she brought just as the wind brings dust. Then she left again, and she returned again, each time staying a little longer. The news she and Chaeyoung brought began to form a picture. The Great Hunt was gaining momentum. The 4 sects that had destroyed the White Crane 50 years ago were actively searching for the lost 9 heavenly arts. The Iron Lotus sect was conducting its search more aggressively than any of the others. Che Mugon sent troops to the 7 regions. He bought up scrolls. He seized small sects for their libraries. He destroyed those who refused. Che the most aggressively of all, Che Mugon had sent detachments to 7 regions. He was buying up scrolls. He was seizing small sects for their libraries. He was destroying those who refused to sell. At the same time, he was preparing a strike on Mount Lingyan. Chaeyoung received information from her contacts. Mugon was assembling an elite unit, 30 fighters, not an inspection team, not a reconnaissance mission, a surgical strike. The objective, to destroy the revived sect, to seize the scrolls, capture or kill the master who creates the techniques. The date is unknown, but it's coming soon. A month, 2, no more. Jinan listened to Chaeyoung's report and felt something inside him change. Not fear. He had long since stopped being afraid. Determination. Cold, clear. Just like that morning when he emerged from the basement onto the ruins of the sect. He began to prepare. Preparing for defense became the sect's primary task. Jinan worked 18 hours a day.
Manhwa stopped trying to get him to go to sleep. Instead, she would stack pain-relieving crystals on his desk and replace them when the stack ran out. The first thing he created was what he called the 1,000 Shards Formation, a defensive system built on a principle that no one on the continent had used. A standard formation is a single barrier, one wall. Break through it and that's it. The 1,000 Shards Formation was different. 44 defective formation scrolls. Each contained a small piece of protection, a scrap of a barrier, a fragment of a deflection field, a stub of a signal network, a third of a trap. Useless on their own, but Jinhan saw how they fit together, not into a single wall, into a labyrinth. Each fragment covered the weakness of its neighbor. One barrier was too thin, but the deflecting field next to it redirected the blow so that only a third of the force reached the barrier. The trap was incomplete, but the signal network warned of an approach and gave time to activate it manually. 44 weak elements woven into a single network, not a wall, a web. Each element supports its neighbors. Destroy one, the rest will reorganize. Destroy 10. The remaining 34 will close in tighter. To break through such a system, you need to destroy all 44 nodes simultaneously, and to do that, you need to know where they are. Yeonmi integrated the formation into her network in 4 days. 4 days without sleep. 4 days of non-stop work during which she controlled up to 90 nodes simultaneously. Her limits had expanded. Her channels, which the whole world considered a defect, operated at a level the Imperial Academy could not have imagined. She rose from the center of the formation, pale with exhaustion. She staggered. Manhwa caught her. Yeonmi looked at Jinhan and smiled. Quiet, tired, but with a confidence this girl hadn't possessed 6 months ago. Next, Jinhan prepared his personal techniques for the final battle. Not new ones, enhanced ones. He revisited every technique he'd created for his people and added elements to them. The path of the reverse crane for Sora gained a 13th form, an unplanned one. Jinhan had found a single fragment among the black scrolls, a snippet of the principle of the resonant strike, a strike that grew stronger with each repetition. The 13th form used all 12 previous forms as a build-up. Each form added a layer of energy. By the 13th, the strike carried the power of all 12. A technique that grew stronger during battle. The longer the fight, the more powerful the finale. The Shield of Lunar Radiance for Manhwa gained a second function, reflection. Not merely blocking a strike, but returning a portion of the energy back. Ha'il brought back 3 scrolls from her last visit that she'd found on the black market. One contained a fragment of mirror technique, useless on its own, but perfectly compatible with the shield. Yeonmi's star crane net didn't need strengthening. Yeonmi strengthened herself. Every day, every hour of practice. The cloaking method for Chaeyoung gained an additional layer, the ability not only to hide but also to create false chi signatures and illusory targets, phantoms that diverted attention. For Soohyun, Jinhan conducted the 4th session of the Lotus return method. 2 damaged layers of the core had already been replaced. The process was proceeding on schedule. The pain was the same every time. Soohyun endured it in silence each time. During the 3rd session, she said, "Thank you," for the first time. Not in a steady voice. quietly. During the fourth session, she provided Jin-han with information. She knew the locations of the Iron Lotus sect's 3 secret bases. She knew the names of the squad commanders. She knew the supply routes. She knew the tactics her father had used during the night of the Ash Moon, and which he would most likely use again. She laid it all out before Jin-han like a map, clearly, in detail, professionally, because the daughter of the sect leader knew her sect from the inside better than any spy. Sora stood nearby and listened. She looked at Soo-hyun. When she finished, Sora nodded at her. Once. A short, firm nod. A first acknowledgement. Not trust. An acknowledgement that Soo-hyun was useful. For Sora, that was a lot. Chae-young confirmed the information through her own channels. Everything matched up. The elite unit's route, its composition, weapons, the unit commander, Mugen's deputy, Wei-jun, a sole birth rank cultivator, first tier, the strongest fighter Mugen could personally dispatch without leaving headquarters. Sole birth, 2 full ranks above Sora, 4 ranks above Jin-han, an abyss. Jin-han had heard that number and knew that Sora couldn't defeat Wei-jun in direct combat, not even with heavenly technique, not even with the 13th form. The difference in chi rank was simply too great. He needed something else, something to even the odds. He returned to the scrolls. He sifted through them. He searched. For 3 days. He found it, not among the red ones, not among the blue ones, among the black ones, among the incomprehensible, unlabeled scrolls he'd set aside because he couldn't determine their purpose. One of them, 4 lines, a description of the principle of linked flows. When 2 or more cultivators synchronize their chi, their combined power exceeds the arithmetic sum. 2 fighters with synchronized chi strike not as 2, but as 3. 5 are like 10, a principle that, in theory, everyone knew. In practice, no one used it, because synchronizing chi required perfect compatibility of techniques, and the techniques of different schools were not compatible. But Jin-han's techniques did align, because he created them all, from a single source, from a single repository, according to a single set of principles, the way of the reverse crane, the shield of lunar radiance, the net of the star crane, Chae-young's camouflage. All of them were assembled from fragments of a single library. All bore the mark of a single bookbinder. They were compatible, from the very beginning, by nature. Jin-han began the assembly. The dance of 1,000 feathers, a group combat technique, 22 fragments, the most complex structure he had ever built. Not personal, collective. 5 people, 5 techniques, 1 rhythm. Synchronization of the fighter's chi flows through a shared circuit. Each element amplifies the others. Sora strikes. Yeonmi guides. Chae-young distracts. Manhwa defends. Soo-hyun, only a third of her core has been restored, but even a third of a core formation rank core is a formidable power. She will become a reservoir, a battery that powers the shared circuit. He had been working for 10 days. His migraine was so severe that he lost consciousness twice. Manhwa sat beside him with a supply of crystals. She brought him back to consciousness. He kept going. On the 11th day, a click. 22 fragments became 1. The dance of 1,000 feathers. Celestial rank. Highest celestial rank. Right on the border of the divine. A group combat technique that had no equal on the Jiulong continent, because no one on the continent could create 5 compatible personal techniques and link them into a single circuit. No one except the binder. He handed out the scrolls. He explained the principle. The 5 students began practicing their synchronization. There was little time left. They arrived 3 weeks later, at night, just like the first time, just like 50 years ago. The night of the Ash Moon repeated itself. The moon was full, white, cold. Yeonmi sensed them 2 hours before they approached. Signal formations on the distant approaches activated one after another. A wave. 32 sources of chi moved up the slope. 32. 2 more than intelligence had reported. Jin-han stood in the center of the basement. 5 people surrounded him. Sora, holding her sword in a reverse grip. Manhwa, with icy chi pulsing around her palms. Chae-young, already half invisible. Yeonmi, with her eyes closed and her hands on the formation nodes. Soo-hyun, straight, pale. Her core was 1/3 restored. That should be enough. It has to be. He gave out instructions. Briefly, clearly. Everyone knew their position. They'd trained for this for 2 weeks, every day. Sora took up her position at the main entrance. She didn't hide. She stood out in the open, the front line, the sect's only celestial warrior. Bait, a trap.
because the enemy would see a single swordswoman and decide she was the main threat, and they'd send their best against her, and the best would get bogged down. Because Sora, with the 13th form, wasn't the same Sora she'd been 6 months ago. Yeonmi took her place at the center of the Thousand Shards formation. She closed her eyes. 112 nodes. She controlled 112 nodes simultaneously. Her scattered meridians were operating at full capacity. Every minute channel fed its own node. The web came to life. Invisible, silent, deadly. Chaeyoung vanished into the shadows. The 4 students she was training took up positions along the perimeter. 8 more students formed a defensive formation in front of the residential pavilions. Basic techniques, Earth rank. Against the elite fighters of the Iron Lotus, they would hold out for minutes. But minutes are time, and time is life. Manhwa stood behind Jinwan. The moonlight shield was activated. Suyeon was nearby. Her arms were lowered. Her chi flowed steadily. She would be the battery, the generator. When the Dance of 1,000 Feathers was activated, she would channel everything she had into the shared circuit. Wei Jun appeared first. He stepped onto the plaza in front of the main hall. Tall, broad-shouldered, black armor with a silver lotus on his chest. His chi pressed down on everything around him like physical weight. The birth of the soul. A power that Jinhan could feel in his skin even from a distance of 50 steps. Behind him were 31 fighters. Chi condensation. Core formation. The best disciples of the Iron Lotus sect. Each of them could kill Jinhen with a single blow. Wei Jun stopped. He looked around. He saw Sora at the entrance, alone, with a sword. He smiled, not maliciously, indulgent. He said something to his men. 6 of them broke away from the group and moved towards Sora. 6 against 1. A sensible tactic. For a normal fight, Sora didn't wait. First form, an upward arc. A white trail of chi sliced through the night air. The first of the 6 blocked. The second flanked from the right. The third from the left. A standard encirclement. Second form. Third, Sora moved. Reverse grip. Trajectories none of the 6 had seen before. They'd trained against standard fencing. Against the straight grip. Against classical schools. The reverse crane wasn't classical. Fourth form. One of the 6 missed the strike. A cut on his thigh. He fell. Fifth. 6th. One more. The remaining 4 regrouped. They became more cautious. The fight slowed down. This was exactly what Jinning had planned. To tie them up. To hold them off. Not to defeat them. To hold them off. Wei Jun watched. His smile faded. He saw that a single swordswoman was holding off all 6. Not defeating them, but holding them off. A heavenly rank technique. He had identified it. His face hardened. He gave the order. The main group moved forward. 25 fighters. Through the sect's territory. Toward the pavilions. Toward the basement. Toward the library. They stepped onto the territory of the Thousand Shards formation. Yami opened her eyes. 112 nodes flared up simultaneously. The ground beneath the advancing fighters' feet lit up. Lines of chi sliced through the darkness like a white web. The first barrier. 3 of them crashed into an invisible wall. They were flung backward. A second barrier lay beyond the first. A trap lay between them. The ground gave way beneath the feet of 2 of them. Not deep, just knee-deep, but enough to stop them. A deflection field on the right. A strike from one of the fighters aimed at the barrier, veered off course and hit his comrade. Chaos. 25 elite fighters flew into a web of 44 weak formations and got bogged down. Each element was weak. Each could be broken through with a single strike. But as soon as you struck one, another activated behind you, and then another, and another. Yeonmi controlled them like a puppeteer. She deactivated the ones that had been broken through. She activated the spares. She reorganized them on the fly. Her hands moved across the formation nodes. Sweat poured down her face. Her teeth were clenched. 112 nodes. 112 of the finest chi channels. All working. All ablaze. Chaeyoung struck from the shadows. 2 fighters collapsed from nervous paralysis before the others realized where the attack had come from. She vanished. She reappeared on the other side. False chi signatures flared up in 3 places at once. 3 fighters lunged at the phantoms. They slashed at empty air. Chaeyoung was in the 4th spot. Another one fell. 8 students in a defensive formation in front of the pavilions held the passage. 2 attackers broke through Yeonmi's web. The students met them head-on. Earth techniques against core formation. 1 student was sent flying into the wall. A second fell. A third held his ground. A 4th struck an attacker in the back. A weak blow. Earth rank. But to the back. The attacker turned around. That split second was enough.
A fifth student struck the exposed side. They held their ground. With blood, stubbornness, and the techniques the scribe from the basement had created for them, Wei Jun stopped watching. He stepped forward. Soul birth chi swirled around him like a shockwave. The Yangmi formations in his path burst. They didn't break through. They burst, like soap bubbles in the wind. The difference in rank rendered the barriers meaningless. He walked through the web, and it melted away around him. Yanmi cried out. The knots in his path faded one by one. She couldn't hold them back. He was too strong. Wei Jun passed through the formations in 30 seconds. He emerged near the basement. He saw Jinhan, Manhwa, Su Yan. He stopped. He looked at Su Yan. His eyes narrowed. He recognized his master's daughter standing next to the enemy. He said that Mu Gong would be disappointed. Su Yan didn't answer. Her face was impassive, a mask. The perfect mask she had worn for 20 years. But Jinhan saw her hands. Her fingers were trembling. Wei Jun raised his hand. Qi concentrated in his palm. One strike. A single strike of the soul birth rank would be enough to kill all three of them. Jinhan said one word. Now, the dance of 1,000 feathers was activated. 5 streams of qi converged into a single circuit. Sora on the platform, Yanmi at the center of the formations, Chaeyoung in the shadows, Meiwa behind her, Suhyun beside her. 5 people, 5 techniques, 1 rhythm. Suhyun exhaled and channeled her qi into the circuit, 1/3 of the restored core formation. A surge of energy rushed through the connections. To Sora, her blade flared. The white light became blinding, the 13th form. She turned away from the 6 opponents who were already lying on the ground. She turned to Wei Jun and struck. The 12 forms of acceleration. Each had been building up energy. The 13th form carried the power of all 12, plus the qi of the 5 others through the shared circuit. The blow Sora delivered was impossible for a qi condensation cultivator. It was a soul birth level strike. Wei Jun blocked it. His defense held, but he retreated, for the first time in the fight, by a single step. His eyes widened. He hadn't expected this. He hadn't expected a swordswoman 2 ranks below him to force him to retreat. Sora didn't give him time to think. Again. First form. Second. Third. Acceleration. The 1,000 feathers dance circuit pulsed. Energy flowed. Yanmi directed the streams. Chaeyoung created decoys. Meihua held the shield. Suhyun fueled the circuit. Jinhan stood in the center and coordinated. He wasn't fighting. He coordinated. Like a conductor. His hands moved along the key points of the circuit. He felt every flow, every connection, every point of tension. Add here. Subtract here. Redirect here. The battle lasted all night. By dawn, it was all over. Not because one side had won, because both sides had exhausted their strength. Of the 32 Iron Lotus fighters, 12 lay unconscious. 7 were seriously wounded. The remaining 13 were still on their feet, but utterly exhausted. The Yangmi formations had ground them down. Not destroyed them. Ground them down. Hour after hour. Trap after trap. Barrier after barrier. Phantom after phantom. 8 hours of battle in a web from which it was impossible to break free with a single blow, because it reformed faster than they could break it. Wei Jun stood on the training ground. His armor was damaged in 4 places. Blood on his left shoulder, blood on his right thigh. Sora stood opposite him. She was breathing heavily, a sword in her hand. Blood from a cut on her forehead was streaming into her right eye. Her left arm hung limply at her side, dislocated. She had used the 13th form 4 times that night. Each time, she forced Wei Jun to retreat, but she didn't win. The difference in rank. Even the dance of 1,000 feathers could not completely bridge the gap between qi condensation and soul birth. It could narrow it, but not leap over it. Suhyun stood by the basement wall, pale as ash. She had poured everything into the circuit, every drop of restored qi. Her core pulsed at its limit. Yanmi lay on the floor. She was conscious but couldn't move. 8 hours of controlling 112 nodes had drained her completely. Chaeyoung sat on the roof. Her right leg was broken. One of the fighters had managed to rescue her after all. She kept creating false traces even with a broken leg. Meihua was still on her feet, the only one of the 5 who was relatively unharmed. She hadn't fought. She'd been healing all night long, running from one wounded person to the next. Ice crystals, one after another, to stop the bleeding, relieving pain, stabilizing them. Her supply of crystals ran out 2 hours before dawn. She'd been working on pure qi for the past 2 hours. Her hands were shaking from exhaustion. 3 students were seriously wounded. One was in critical condition. Manhwa had pulled him back from the brink twice. Jinhan stood at the center of the Thousand Feathers dance formation, unwounded, unharmed. He hadn't taken a single hit all night because 5 people were shielding him with their bodies. Because without him, the formation would crumble. Because he was the center, irreplaceable, vulnerable, important. And he knew it. And he hated it. Wei Jun watched him across the arena, through Sora, through the ruins and bodies and formations. He looked at the skinny young man with first-stage core formation cultivation, at the scribe, at the boy. And he couldn't reach him, because the boy had created a system that had stopped 32 elite fighters and a soul birth-ranked commander. Not with strength, with his mind. Wei Jun said one thing. He said he would report to Mugen, that he would come himself, that against a third-stage soul birth-ranked Mugen, these formations and techniques would not hold, that this was not a victory, a reprieve. Then he turned around. He rallied his men. Those who could walk went on their own. Those who couldn't walk were carried. They made their way down the trail, slowly, battered, exhausted, but alive. All of them. Jinhan didn't kill anyone. He didn't order anyone to be killed. Sora could have finished off the commander. She didn't. Because Jinhan had said one thing before the battle. He said they were defending themselves, not seeking revenge. That every fallen fighter was someone's student, someone's son, someone's friend. That they weren't the Iron Lotus. That they were the White Crane. And the White Crane does not destroy. Sora argued, vehemently. She said the enemy wouldn't appreciate mercy, that Mugen would come again, stronger. Jinhan replied that he knew. The morning after the battle, the sun was rising over Mount Linyun. Golden light flooded the ruins, which were ruins once more. The restored buildings were damaged. The training ground was riddled with craters. 70% of the Yongmi formations had been destroyed. The library was intact. The basement was intact. The people were alive. All of them. Not a single casualty. Wounded, maimed, exhausted, but alive. Jinhan sat on the steps in front of the basement entrance, a cup of cold tea in his hands, a cracked cup. The very same one, the one he'd found in the ruins on the first day. He drank from it every morning. Sora approached. She sat down heavily beside him. Her right arm was in a sling. Silently, she just sat down. Manhwa came out of the basement. She brought warm tea. She took the cold one. She set down the warm one. He took it. Chaeyoung reported the casualties while sitting on the roof because she couldn't climb down with her broken leg. Her voice was steady, professional. 3 seriously wounded, 1 in critical but stable condition. The rest have bruises and cuts. The formation needs to be reorganized. There's a supply of scrolls for repairs. It'll take a week's work. Yeonmi was lying in the basement. Manhwa covered her with a blanket. She slept for the first time in 20 hours. Suyeon stood by the path along which her father's fighters had left. She looked down. She didn't move. Ha-il appeared from around the corner. No one understood where she'd come from during the battle, but she had a bag slung over her shoulder. She walked up to Jinhan. She dropped the bag on the steps. The bag clinked. She untied it. Inside were scrolls, trophies, gathered from the battlefield. Scrolls of techniques from the Iron Lotus sect. Hale said, "Well then, boss, let's sort through this junk they've kindly brought us." Jinhan looked at the bag, at the scrolls. He activated the scribe's eye. He saw structures, outlines, flows, Iron Lotus techniques, alien techniques, but techniques nonetheless, which means fragments. Which means material. He smiled. Let's take a look. It might come in handy. But before he touched the first swirl, he looked at Suyeon. She was still standing by the path, with her back to him. He could see her shoulders trembling. He stood up, walked over to her, stood beside her, in silence. She didn't turn around. Then she said quietly that Wei Jun would report to her father that she had betrayed the sect, that there was no turning back now, that she had made her choice. For the first time in her life, she'd chosen for herself, and that was frightening. Jinhan stood beside her and said nothing. Then he said that choosing is always scary,
That he too was afraid every day. That he was afraid of making a mistake in the assembly and that someone would die. That he was afraid he wouldn't make it in time and the enemies would prove stronger. That he was afraid of not being good enough. But that fear was no reason not to choose. Soo-hyun turned around. She looked at him. The mask on her face finally cracked. No smile, no tears, just a living face for the first time. She nodded. They returned to the basement, together. 3 months after the battle on Mount Lingyun.
Jinhan was sitting in the basement. Before him lay a mysterious scroll marked Dispose of, couple it on Kyer unusable. The very one. The one his ability couldn't read. The one that showed emptiness instead of structure. For 3 months he had returned to it every night, unfolded it, looked at it, tried. Emptiness. Always empty. Today, something had changed. He couldn't say exactly what. Maybe his ability had grown after a year of non-stop work. Maybe his understanding had deepened. Maybe he was just so tired that he'd stopped trying and started seeing. He unrolled the scroll. He activated the transcriber's eye. Emptiness, as always, but this time he didn't stare into the emptiness. He looked at the edges, at the frame, at the boundary between the text he saw with his eyes and the emptiness his ability revealed. And he saw. The text on the scroll wasn't a technique, it wasn't a method, it wasn't a principle, it was a map. 5 fragments, 5 lines converging at a single point. This scroll contained 1/5 of the root. Without the other 4 parts, it was a meaningless set of symbols. His ability showed emptiness because it was trying to read the scroll as a technique. But this wasn't a technique. It was an address. He sat poring over the scroll until morning. He thought. He remembered. 50 years ago, 4 sects had attacked the White Crane. They ransacked the library. They took 3,000 techniques. But why would 4 sects attack just one? Envy, greed, fear of a powerful neighbor. All of that was true, but not the whole truth. Chae-young brought the information 3 weeks ago, information she'd pieced together bit by bit from her contacts and from the inscriptions on the captured Iron Lotus scrolls. The 4 sects had found 4 fragments in the White Crane's library, 4 pieces of a map, and divided them among themselves. They spent 50 years trying to piece them together. They couldn't, because the fragments were encrypted, not with a code, not with a cipher, but with a structure. They were recorded as a technique, like a scroll based on the principle of the Tao. And only someone who knew how to read techniques, not as text, but as architecture, could decipher them. Only a bookbinder. Jinhan held the 5th fragment in his hands, the last piece of the map. The piece the attackers hadn't found because it was lying in a box labeled Dispose of, Collection, Unusable. In the trash, just like everything else that had saved his life. The map led to the Founder's Forbidden Library, a place shrouded in legend. A library hidden beyond Mount Lingyun. A library rumored to house techniques surpassing the divine rank. The legacy of the founder of the White Crane sect, the very one who, according to legend, attained the semi-divine rank. Emperor Zhou declared the Great Hunt. Whoever gathers the 9 heavenly arts will receive the title of Imperial Mentor. The entire continent is hunting for the lost techniques. No one knows that the 9 celestial arts lie in the Forbidden Library. No one except the 4 sects that have been searching for the way there for 50 years, and the scribe who holds the key. In the morning, Jinhan gathered everyone. 6 people in the basement. Sora, Meihua, Chae-young, Yeonmi, Soo-hyun, Ha-il, who had returned 2 days ago and hadn't left since. He placed the scroll on the table. He told them what he had found. He explained what it was. He explained what it meant. He explained that the 4 sects held the remaining 4 fragments, that the fragments were structurally encrypted, that only the celestial binding could read them, that without it, the map was useless, that with it, the map leads to a legacy that will change the balance of power on the continent. He fell silent. 6 pairs of eyes were watching him. Then he said something else. He said he didn't want the Forbidden Library. He didn't want the 9 heavenly arts. He didn't want the title of Imperial Mentor. He wanted the Night of the Ash Moon to never happen, neither with his sect nor with any other. He said that a system in which 4 sects can destroy a 5th with impunity for the sake of a library is a system that must change, that a monopoly on knowledge is poison, that as long as techniques remain currency, weapons, and a casus belli, wars will not cease. He said he wanted to create an open library, a repository of techniques accessible to all cultivators, free of charge, open, without restrictions, that anyone who wants to learn should have the opportunity to do so, that knowledge does not belong to the sects, knowledge belongs to the world. Silence. A long silence. Then Sora snorted and said it was madness, that he wanted to become the enemy of every sect on the continent at once, that they'd kill him before he even had a chance to hang up a sign. Then she placed her hand on her sword and said that meant she'd have to kill a lot and often. Manhwa smiled. Quietly. She said the budget for such a project would be astronomical, and that she was already crunching the numbers. Chae-young raised an eyebrow. She said this was the most interesting mission of her entire life, and the most suicidal, but that she'd worked for those who changed the world before. Only they made it worse. It's nice, for a change, to work for someone who makes it better. Yeonmi raised her hand. She quietly asked if she could create a formation shield for the open library, because she already had the architecture in mind. 240 nodes, maybe 300. She needed to think it over. Soo-hyun was silent longer than anyone else. Then she said she knew how cults worked from the inside. She knows their weaknesses, their fears, their politics, and that if Jinhan wants to change the system, he has to understand the system. She could be his eyes in this world. Haeil clapped her hands and said that the open library was certainly noble and beautiful, but someone had to deliver these scrolls across the continent, and that she had a trade network. Small, but growing. Jinhan listened to them. He looked at each one. The swordswoman the world called tainted. The alchemist the world called incompatible. The spy whom the world had nearly erased. The girl whom the world called broken. The enemy's daughter whom the world had turned into a tool. The merchant whom the world had stripped of trust. 6 defective scrolls that he had woven into a team. He pulled another scroll from his bosom, a small one, found inside the 5th fragment of the map, tucked between layers of paper, sealed so that only the one who had read the fragment could open it, a message to the air. He read it at night, alone. The founder of the White Crane sect wrote about his journey, about how, 1,000 years ago, he had been a scribe, a copyist, a scavenger, about how he had gathered others' fragments and stitched them together into a whole, about how he had founded the sect, not as a martial arts school, but as a workshop, a place where fragments become techniques, where trash becomes a weapon, where the defective becomes unique. He wrote that the celestial binding is not the limit, that it is the first step, that beyond it lies celestial authorship, the ability not to gather others' fragments but to create techniques from nothingness, from a pure understanding of the Tao, not from material, from knowledge, from principle, from essence. He wrote that to achieve authorship, one thing is needed, to understand that no technique belongs to anyone, that knowledge is like water, it flows, it knows no boundaries, it cannot be locked away forever. Whoever tries to lock up water builds a dam. The dam holds for a while. Then it breaks, and the water sweeps away everything behind it. The open library is not idealism, it is the Tao, the way of water. Jinhong placed the message on the table. 6 pairs of eyes looked at the text, then at him. He said the path would be long, that Mugung would come, that the 4 sects would not back down, that the emperor could become an enemy or an ally, that the world does not want to change and will resist, but that he is a scribe, and that scribes know how to do one thing, to work, slowly, methodically, line by line, scroll by scroll, until the work is finished. He stood up, left the basement, climbed the steps to the main hall, or rather, to what remained of it. The walls were half restored, the roof a quarter. The columns still stood, new ones, made of local stone, not blackened by soot, gray, clean. A plaque hung above the entrance, an old one, found in the rubble during the first week. Charred at the edges, 3 hieroglyphs were cracked but still legible. The White Crane sect. He stood beneath that plaque, alone, in silence. A year ago, he had stood right here, in this very spot. Amid the ashes and bodies, a scribe without a single technique, with the cultivation of a child, with a basement full of junk. Now, behind him stood the sect, 50 disciples, 6 masters, a library of 40 techniques, 10 celestial rank techniques, one of the highest celestial rank, formations that had stopped an elite squad, a reputation that spread across the continent, a name spoken with respect and fear, the scroll master of Mount Lingyan, the scroll binder. But he wasn't alone. 6 others followed him up the steps. Sora stood to his right, hand on her sword. As always, Manhwa to his left.
A warm cup of tea held out toward him. As always, Chae-young on the roof, watching. As always, Yeonmi at the base of the formation column, hand on the knot, ready. Soo-hyun 3 steps away, back straight, gaze steady, without a mask for the first time. Ha-yeol appeared from around the corner, her jewelry jingling, with a new bag on her back. He looked at the sign, the white crane. 300 years ago, the founder had hung it in this spot. 50 years ago, it was knocked down. A year ago, he raised it from the ashes, and hung it again. He turned to his people, said it was time to work. He went down to the basement, sat down at the table. Scrolls lay before him. Rubbish, drafts, scraps, trophies, fragments of the 5th element of the map. The founder's message. Among them lay a brush and a blank sheet of paper. He picked up the brush, dipped it in ink, and began to write. The first scroll of the open library.